Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. The word Amazon usually brings to mind a very specific image, doesn't it? Leather armor, drawn bow, wild hair streaming as horses thunder across ancient battlefields. But here's what shouldn't exist. An entire nation of women who made war their profession, who needed no men except for the continuation of their line, who mastered the horse and the bow with such skill that the mightiest warriors of Greece trembled at their approach. By all the logic of the ancient Mediterranean world, by every social order the Greeks held sacred, such women were impossible. The natural order, as they understood it, placed men in war and women in the home. Masculine strength conquered, feminine grace nurtured. This was the foundation of civilization itself. And yet, for over 1,000 years, from the age of heroes to the campaigns of Alexander, Greek poets and historians spoke of the Amazons, not as fantasy, not as metaphor, but as real as Persians or Egyptians or any other foreign people. They described their cities, named their queens, recorded their battles, carved their images on temple friezes, and painted them on countless vases. The Greeks didn't treat the Amazons as myth. They treated them as memory, as threat, as the most unsettling mirror ever held up to their ordered world. Tonight, we will travel to the edges of the known world, where legend and history blur into one another. We'll walk through Greek imagination to discover what the Amazons meant to the men who feared them. Then we'll journey beyond those tales to find the flesh and blood women who inspired them, riding the steppes of Central Asia, arrows in their hands and wind in their hair. We'll stand on Athenian walls as warrior women lay siege to the heart of Greece. We'll excavate burial mounds where women lie surrounded by weapons and armor. And we'll trace how these women, real and imagined, have ridden through human consciousness for 3,000 years, never quite fading, never quite dying, still challenging us with the same impossible question. What if strength has no gender? May I ask for your help? Liking and subscribing takes just a moment, but makes a huge difference for the channel. I'm grateful for your consideration. I'm also always amazed by our international reach, so I'd appreciate hearing where you're joining from and your local time. As the present fades to whispers, we find ourselves transported to the 8th century BC, to the rocky shores of Greece, where sailors return with impossible tales, where poets gather stories that will echo through eternity, where the Mediterranean crashes against stone, and the eastern horizon holds mysteries that both terrify and fascinate at the edge of the known world. In the beginning, the Amazons lived at the very edge of where Greek knowledge ended and imagination began. If you sailed north across the Black Sea, past the last Greek colonies clinging to foreign shores, you would enter their realm. If you travelled east beyond Persia, through mountains where gods were said to walk, you might find their cities. The Greeks placed them in Scythia, in Sarmatia, in Pontus, along the southern coast of that dark water, in Libya, in Thrace. Wherever the map grew uncertain, there the Amazons might dwell. This was no accident. The frontier has always been where the impossible becomes possible, where the rules of civilization bend and break. In the Greek mind, the farther you travelled from Athens or Sparta or Thebes, the stranger the world became. Order gave way to chaos. The familiar yielded to the alien. And at those distant margins, apparently, even nature's most fundamental law could be reversed. Women could become warriors. Daughters could rule where sons should reign. The Amazon existed in that liminal space, where one world ended and another, incomprehensible world began. The poets described their land with a mixture of wonder and dread. Herodotus, that curious traveller of the 5th century BC, wrote of a region beyond the Black Sea where warrior women rode horses as skillfully as any Scythian man. Diodorus Siculus spoke of an island of women in the far west, near Libya, where Amazons had built a great civilization before the Trojan War. The tragic playwright Aeschylus called them the Amazons, a name whose meaning the Greeks themselves debated. Some said it meant without a breast, claiming these women cut or burned away the right breast so it would not interfere with drawing a bow. Others argued it meant without grain, indicating they ate no bread, living instead on meat and mare's milk like the wildest nomads. Still others believed it derived from a word meaning belt, connecting them to the girdle of their queen that Heracles would one day seek. Whatever the name meant, it carried power. To speak of Amazons was to speak of inversion, of boundaries crossed, of the world turned upside down. They dwelt where Greek ships rarely sailed, where Greek soldiers rarely marched, in that vast expanse of steppe and forest and mountain that stretched away to the east, cold and limitless. From that distant realm, the stories said, they emerged from time to collide with Greek heroes, to wage war on Greek cities, to remind civilized men that the world contained forces they could neither understand nor control. The horizon itself seemed different in Amazon country. The sky stretched wider, the grass rolled on forever, great herds of horses moved like clouds across the plains. The wind carried strange scents, unfamiliar sounds. No Greek polis organized life here. No agora gathered citizens for debate. No laws carved in stone governed behavior. Instead, there was movement and space and freedom, the kind that terrified men who knew only city walls and defined roles. Out there, in that enormous emptiness, women rode to war. Out there, the impossible was real. Born from divine violence, every people must have an origin, and the Greeks who told stories of the Amazons gave them a beginning as dramatic as their existence. These were not ordinary women who had simply learned to fight. They were born from violence, shaped by divinity, created for war itself. The most common tale made them daughters of Ares, the god of war, and Harmonia, a name that seems ironic given what these women became. Ares, that savage deity whom even the other Olympians treated with suspicion, had fathered a race of female warriors. In them flowed the same fury that drove men to slaughter each other on battlefields. The same love of combat, the same terrible joy in the clash of bronze and the cry of the dying, but channeled through female form. This inheritance became something the Greeks found even more disturbing. A man at war fulfilled his nature. A woman at war violated hers. Or so the Greeks believed. Other genealogies existed. Some said the Amazons descended from Ares and Otrera, a nymph, or mortal woman who became their first queen. Otrera supposedly founded Themyscira, the great Amazon capital, and built temples to Ares and Artemis. She bore Ares 4 daughters, Hippolyta, Antiope, Melanippe, and Penthesilea. These names would echo through Greek legend, each queen meeting a Greek hero, each encounter ending in tragedy or triumph, or both. The connection to Artemis ran deep. The virgin huntress, the goddess who roamed wild places with bow in hand, the deity who demanded that her followers remain unmarried, seemed a natural patron for women warriors. The Amazons, it was said, worshipped Artemis above all others. They hunted in her name, fought in her name, maintained their independence in her name. Like the goddess, they valued freedom over domesticity, the forest over the hearth, the wild over the tame. They were, in essence, Artemis made flesh, multiplied into an entire nation. Some myths went further back still, connecting the Amazons to even stranger origins. A few tales claimed they descended from Titans, from those ancient beings who ruled before Zeus and his siblings claimed the throne of Olympus. This would make them older than the current order of the world, remnants of a previous age when the rules were different, when power was distributed differently between male and female. Perhaps, these stories whispered, the Amazons represented not a violation of natural law, but a memory of how things once were, before the Olympians established their patriarchal order. Whatever their origin, the divine blood in their veins marked them as different from mortal women. They were faster, stronger, more skilled. They could ride for days without tiring. They could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy from horseback at full gallop. They could endure wounds that would fell ordinary women or men. They lived longer, fought harder, feared less. The gods had made them for a specific purpose: to be warriors, to be free, to be everything Greek women could never be. And because they were touched by divinity, they were dangerous. You could not defeat an Amazon the way you might defeat a Persian soldier or a Thracian raider. These women carried the blessing and curse of the gods themselves. To face them was to face something partly divine, partly human, wholly other. To fight them was to challenge not just mortal enemies but the cosmic order itself, to ask whether the gods might have created something beyond male understanding or male control, a society turned upside down. The Greeks, obsessed with understanding foreign peoples, tried to describe how Amazon society functioned. The picture they painted was their own world, reflected in a dark mirror. Every norm inverted, every rule reversed. If this description was fantasy, it was fantasy that revealed deep Greek anxieties about gender, power, and the fragility of civilization. In Amazon society, as the Greeks told it, women held all authority. They ruled as queens, they made laws, they commanded armies, they owned property, they were warriors first, trained from childhood in the arts of combat. They learned to ride almost before they could walk, the horse becoming an extension of their own bodies. They mastered the bow, the spear, the axe, the sword. They wore armour, carried shields, went to war not as victims or prizes but as combatants, as conquerors. They were, in short, everything a Greek woman was not permitted to be. And the men? Here the Greeks strained credulity even further. Men in Amazon society, the stories claimed, lived in subjugation. They performed domestic tasks, raising children, weaving, cooking, managing the household. They were not taught to fight. Some versions said they were deliberately crippled in childhood, their legs broken, or tendons cut to prevent them from running away or rebelling. They existed solely to serve female needs, to provide labour, to father children. The complete reversal of Greek household structure could hardly be more stark. The Amazons, it was said, had no use for continuous cohabitation with men. Once a year, according to Herodotus and others, they would meet with men from neighbouring tribes for the purpose of procreation. These encounters were brief, transactional, devoid of the romance or family structure Greeks valued. After these liaisons, the Amazons would return to their all-female society. 9 months later, children would be born. Here the stories varied. Most agreed that female children were kept and raised as warriors, inducted into Amazon society, taught the skills their mothers possessed. But male children presented a problem for a society of women. Some tales claimed the boys were killed at birth, a practice that horrified Greek audiences. Other versions, slightly less dark, said the males were sent to their fathers, returned to the neighbouring tribes to be raised as those people's children. Still others suggested the boys were kept but reduced to the servant class, made to perform the domestic labour that kept Amazon cities functioning while women rode to war. The detail that captured Greek imagination most vividly was the claim about breasts. Multiple sources repeated the story that young Amazon girls had their right breast seared away or cut off, preventing its development. The reasoning seemed logical to Greek minds. A full breast would interfere with drawing a bowstring, would throw off an archer's aim, would be a liability in combat. Better to remove it in childhood, to shape the body for war, just as the mind was shaped for combat. No archaeological evidence has ever supported this practice. Every image Greeks created of Amazons showed them with 2 breasts, but the story persisted because it worked as metaphor. These women had literally cut away part of their femininity to become warriors. They had mutilated themselves, sacrificed the maternal breast, rejected the nursing mother's fundamental role. They had transformed their bodies to match their impossible social role. The detail was almost certainly fiction, but it was fiction that expressed something Greeks believed was essential about the Amazon threat. These women had deliberately destroyed their own womanhood. Their cities, too, seemed to function differently from Greek police. Themyscira, the most famous Amazon city, sat on the river Thermodon along the southern coast of the Black Sea. Greek accounts described it as wealthy and well defended, surrounded by walls, filled with temples and palaces. But there were no symposia where men reclined and debated philosophy. No gymnasium where citizens exercised naked and discussed politics. No agora where free men gathered to vote and make collective decisions. Instead, the city hummed with female voices, female authority, female power. Government worked differently, marriage worked differently, religion worked differently, warfare worked differently. Everything a Greek took for granted about how human society must be organized, and found its opposite in Amazon country. They had laws but not Greek laws. They had hierarchy but not Greek hierarchy. They had honor but not Greek honor. They were familiar enough to be comprehensible, alien enough to be terrifying. Some Greek thinkers found a certain logic in this arrangement. If women were naturally suited to certain tasks and men to others, as most Greeks believed, then perhaps a society could exist where those roles were simply reversed. If men could rule women through physical strength, could women not rule men the same way if they possessed that strength? The Amazon challenge was not that they were impossible, but that they suggested male dominance might be circumstantial rather than natural, might be maintained by force and tradition rather than ordained by the cosmos. Other Greeks rejected any legitimacy to Amazon society. To them, it represented pure chaos, the world gone wrong, nature violated. Women ruling men was as absurd as the sun rising in the west, as rivers flowing uphill, as the dead returning to life. It could not truly exist. And yet, the stories persisted, the names accumulated, the details multiplied. Somehow, impossibly, the Amazons seemed real. You stand at the training ground. You wake before dawn on the endless steppe. The air tastes of frost and grass. Above you, stars still scatter across the black sky, countless and cold. More stars than you knew existed when you were a child in distant lands. But you are not a child anymore, and this is your home now, this vast open country where the wind never stops and the horizon never ends. You rise from your bedroll, your body stiff from yesterday's training. Around you, other young women are stirring, moving with the silent efficiency of those who know every moment matters. No one speaks. There is only the rustle of leather and felt, the soft clink of bronze ornaments, the breathing of horses tethered nearby. The cold bites at your exposed skin, but you have learned not to complain. Amazons, do not complain. Your teacher is already waiting at the training ground. She sits motionless on her horse, a dark shape against the paling eastern sky. Her name is Melanippe, and she has survived 30 years of warfare. Scars crosshatch her arms. She lost 3 fingers on her left hand to a Scythian blade, but can still shoot arrows with accuracy that seems supernatural. She does not need to call out. Her presence is summons enough. You approach your horse, a sturdy mare with a coat the colour of dried blood. She knows you now. After months of daily contact, she smells your hand, accepts your touch, stands patient as you check the saddle pad and secure your equipment. Your bow, carefully wrapped against the morning dew, goes into its case. Your quiver, 12 arrows with bronze points you hammered and sharpened yourself, hangs within easy reach. A long knife rests against your thigh. This is your life now, reduced to leather and bronze and wood, and the skills to use them. You mount smoothly. That, at least, has become natural. You remember your first weeks here, the awkwardness, the fear, the way you slid off again and again until your thighs were bruised and bloody. Now you move as one with the horse, reading her mood through the tension in her muscles, the position of her ears, the rhythm of her breathing. Melanippe leads you away from camp at a trot. Behind you, a dozen other young women follow in loose formation. The grass whispers beneath hooves. The sky slowly brightens, deep blue fading toward grey. Though the sun has not yet appeared, you know where you're going. The same place as always. The killing ground. It's a flat stretch of steppe, marked by wooden posts driven into earth. Targets dangle from some. Woven grass figures, roughly human in shape. Leather bags stuffed with wool. Pieces of old armour that caught too many arrows to be useful in battle. The posts are different distances, different angles. You will have to hit them while riding at full gallop. You will have to hit them while turning, while circling, while retreating. You will have to hit them until Melanippe decides you can hit them while exhausted, while bleeding, while dying. The sun breaks the horizon at last, flooding the steppe with sudden golden light. Melanippe raises her hand. Her voice, when it comes, carries no warmth. Show me you deserve to live. You dig your heels into your mare's flanks. She leaps forward, moving from standing to gallop in 3 strides. Wind fills your ears, tears at your hair, stings your eyes. You reach for your bow, string it in 2 practiced motions, even as the ground blurs beneath you. First arrow from the quiver. Nock it. Draw. The target appears ahead, rushing toward you. You don't think. Thinking is too slow. You feel where the arrow wants to go. You feel the wind. You feel the horse's movement. You release. The arrow sings through the morning air. It catches the target center mass. You're already reaching for the next shaft. Another target, another shot, another hit. Around you, other young women are doing the same, creating a rhythm of hoofbeats and twanging strings and arrows striking home. This is your music now. This is your prayer. You circle back, chest heaving, arms burning. Melanippe nods once. It's the closest she comes to praise. Again, she says. Faster this time, and if you miss breakfast. You don't miss. By the time the sun stands high overhead, you can barely lift your arms. Your fingers are bloody, where the bowstring has worn through calluses. Your thighs scream from hours in the saddle. You taste blood in your mouth, though you don't know why. But you have hit every target. You have proven once again that you might one day become what Melanippe already is. A true Amazon, a rider of the wind, a dealer of death. As you walk your exhausted horse back toward camp, cooling her down slowly as you were taught, you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction. Somewhere to the south, Greek men tell stories about women like you, about impossible warrior queens and cities where females rule. They make you creatures of myth, daughters of gods, beings beyond nature. They don't understand the truth that Melanippe makes clear every dawn. There's nothing magical about being an Amazon. There's only training and suffering and will. There's only the decision, made fresh every morning, that you will be strong enough to survive in a world that wants you dead or silent or both. There's only the bow in your hand and the horse beneath you, and the endless steppe where weakness means extinction. You are not impossible. You are simply necessary. And that, perhaps, is what terrifies them most. Cities of women. The Amazons did not live in tents alone, scattered nomads without permanent roots. The Greeks spoke of their cities, places where stone rose from earth, where order imposed itself on the wilderness, where a society of women had built civilization on their own terms. Themyscira stood as their greatest settlement, located along the Thermodon River, where it met the Black Sea, protected by mountains to the south and waves to the north. The city occupied a place both strategic and beautiful. Greek traders who claimed to have sailed past. It described walls of fitted stone, towers overlooking the water, piers where ships could dock. They spoke of buildings that gleamed in sunlight, painted in colours bright enough to seem barbaric to Greek tastes. Red and blue and gold adorned the temples. Banners rippled in sea breezes, showing symbols the Greeks could not decipher. The river Thermodon provided water and transportation. It flowed cold and clear from mountain springs, carrying fish, allowing access to interior regions where horses and cattle grazed. The Amazons built their city at the river's mouth, controlling both sea routes and the rich plains beyond. It was, Greek military minds recognized, an excellent location. Any people living there would prosper. Any army holding it would be difficult to dislodge. Within the walls, the city organized itself around female needs and female purposes. At the center stood temples to Artemis and Ares, those divine patrons of Amazon existence. The temple to Artemis was said to be particularly magnificent, rivaling the great shrines at Ephesus and Delphi. Inside, priestesses maintained eternal flames. They performed rituals that Greek men were never permitted to witness, ceremonies that honored the virgin huntress and asked her blessing on Amazon warriors preparing for battle. The temple to Ares accepted different offerings. Here, captured weapons were dedicated, armor taken from defeated enemies, shields that would never again protect their original owners. Blood stained the altar, they said. Sacrifices to the war god required violence, and the Amazons did not flinch from providing it. Some tales claimed they sacrificed male prisoners here, though others insisted they were more practical, selling captives as slaves, rather than wasting valuable trade goods on religious ceremony. Beyond the temples, the city contained markets, workshops, barracks, stables, blacksmiths forged weapons, and repaired armor, creating the bronze and iron tools that made Amazon military power possible. Leatherworkers crafted saddles and bridles and armor, materials designed for riders who spent more time mounted than on foot. Fletchers made arrows by the thousands, keeping warehouses stocked, so Amazon warriors need never lack ammunition. The markets traded in goods from across the known world. Amber from the north, grain from Scythian farms, wine from Greek colonies, silk that had travelled impossible distances from somewhere in the Far East. The Amazons, whatever else they were, participated in commerce, understood trade, accumulated wealth. They were not primitive savages, living outside civilization. They had simply built a different civilization, one that still made room for female warriors, but also included all the complex infrastructure that any advanced society requires. Residential areas filled the spaces between public buildings. Here, the Amazons lived in houses of stone or timber, not so different from Greek homes except in who inhabited them. Extended families of women, perhaps grandmothers and mothers and daughters and granddaughters, all warriors at some point in their lives, now at different stages. Young women preparing for their first raids, veterans bearing scars and missing limbs, training the next generation. Old women who had survived everything warfare could inflict, now serving as advisors and historians and keepers of tradition. The men, in Greek accounts, occupied separate quarters. They were kept away from decision-making, away from weapons, away from power. Some versions placed them in a distinct district on the city's edge, a place where they could perform their domestic functions without interfering in Amazon society proper. Others scattered them throughout the city, but always subordinate, always supervised, always reminded that in Themyscira, masculine strength meant nothing. At night, the city would glow with torches and cook fires. Smoke rose from hundreds of homes, voices carried on evening air, though these were female voices, singing, shouting, laughing, arguing. Guards walked the walls, watching for threats from land or sea. The gates, massive things of bronze and timber, closed at sunset and opened at dawn. The city slept lightly, like a warrior who knows enemies are always near. Other Amazon cities existed, though Themyscira remained the most famous. Some Greeks placed Amazon settlements in Libya, claiming a great civilization of warrior women had once ruled North African coasts before expanding into Asia Minor. Others describe cities deep in Scythian territory, far from any Greek explorer's reach. The details varied, but the essential image remained constant. These women had built permanent homes, had created urban centers, had achieved what the Greeks reluctantly recognized as civilization. This was part of what made the Amazons so unsettling. If they had been merely barbarian raiders, scattered nomads without culture or permanence, the Greeks could have dismissed them easily. But cities meant organization. Cities meant architecture, engineering, long-term planning. Cities meant a society stable enough to invest in stone and expect to use those buildings for generations. The Amazons, it seemed, intended to endure. They had staked their claim to earth itself, had said through mortar and masonry that they belonged, that they would not vanish, that this impossible world they had created possessed the solidity of walls and foundations. And those walls, Greeks knew, might someday have to be breached. Those foundations might someday have to be torn up, because as long as Themyscira stood, as long as Amazon cities rose from foreign soil, the world remained open to possibilities that patriarchal civilization could not tolerate. As long as women ruled somewhere, even somewhere distant and strange, the Greek order was incomplete. As long as the impossible remained built in stone, anything might be possible. The shadow they cast. The Amazons haunted Greek consciousness in ways that mere military enemies could never match. A Persian army was dangerous but comprehensible. A Thracian tribe was violent but explicable. The Amazons were something else entirely, something that reached into the Greek psyche and twisted fundamental assumptions about reality itself. Greek men, secure in their symposia, in their gymnasiums, in their assemblies, where only male citizens gathered to debate and decide, must have felt a cold whisper sometimes when Amazon stories circulated. What if strength was not inherently masculine? What if the social order that gave them power rested not on nature but on force, on tradition, on constant reinforcement of ideas about proper roles and appropriate behaviours? What if, in other words, everything could be different? The Amazons represented that terrifying possibility. They suggested that women, given different circumstances, different training, different expectations, might equal or exceed male warriors. They implied that feminine weakness was learned, not innate. They demonstrated, at least in story, that societies could organize themselves in radically different ways and still function, still build cities, still wage successful wars. This was why the Amazons appeared so often in Greek art. They decorated vases, filled temple friezes, inspired sculptures, but look closely at those images, and you see something revealing. The Amazons are always beautiful. Even in defeat, even dying, they possess grace and allure. They wear exotic costumes that manage to reveal feminine curves, despite supposedly being armor. Their faces, even in battle, retain delicate features. The Greeks could not imagine female warriors without also imagining them as objects of desire. And perhaps that was part of the fascination. These women fought like men but looked like women. They combined the thrilling danger of combat with the sexual appeal of the feminine form. They offered, in fantasy at least, a kind of conquest unavailable with Greek wives and daughters. To defeat an Amazon, to overpower her, carried erotic charge that defeating a male enemy never could. The Amazon represented ultimate resistance, the woman who refused submission, and therefore defeating her became the ultimate masculine achievement. But there was fear beneath the fascination, fear that masculine superiority might be illusion, fear that the careful structure of Greek society, with its strict gender roles and male dominance, might be fragile rather than natural. Fear that given the chance, Greek women themselves might become Amazons, might reject domesticity, might pick up weapons and challenge the men who claimed authority over them. The Amazon then served a purpose in Greek culture. She was the warning, the boundary marker, the demonstration of what happened when women forgot their place. Every Amazon story ended the same way. The warrior women were defeated, killed, or domesticated. Heracles took Hippolyta's belt, Theseus abducted Antiope. Achilles slew Penthesilea. The message was clear. Female power, no matter how fierce, ultimately yielded to male dominance. The natural order could be threatened but not overthrown. The impossible might exist at the edges of the world, but it could not triumph at the centre. And yet, the stories kept being told. Generation after generation of Greeks returned to Amazon tales, painted them on pottery, carved them in stone, performed them in theatres, wrote them in histories. If the Amazons were merely fantasy, they were fantasy that Greek culture could not stop creating. They were the shadow that civilization cast, the dark reflection that refused to disappear no matter how many times heroes conquered warrior queens. Somewhere beyond the Black Sea, in lands Greeks rarely visited, in steppes and forests and mountains, the Amazons waited, real or imagined, threat or wish, fear or desire, they remained. And Greek men, safe behind their city walls, surrounded by properly submissive women, could not entirely convince themselves that those distant warriors were impossible, because if women like that existed somewhere, then perhaps they could exist anywhere. Perhaps they could exist even here, in the heart of Greece itself, if circumstances ever changed enough to call them forth. The shadow they cast was long. It stretched across centuries. It darkened Greek confidence just enough to keep the stories alive. As long as men claimed power over women, as long as that power rested on force rather than mutual agreement, the Amazon would wait at the edges of imagination. Impossible, perhaps, but never quite impossible enough to forget. Beyond the Black Sea. The Greeks called it the Euxine Sea, the hospitable sea, though the name was wishful thinking more than accurate description. That dark water could turn violent without warning, could swallow ships in storms that appeared from nowhere, could freeze solid in winter along its northern reaches. But it was the gateway to something far stranger than dangerous waters. Beyond the Black Sea lay a world so vast, so different from the Mediterranean, that Greek minds struggled to comprehend it. Herodotus travelled there in the 5th century BC, or at least came close enough to gather stories from those who had. That curious historian, that father of history and father of lies as later writers would call him, recorded what he learned with a mixture of skepticism and wonder. He described the land north of the Black Sea as endless grassland, steppe that rolled on for distances that made no sense to a Greek, accustomed to mountains dividing everything into small, manageable pieces. This was a sea of grass rather than water, he wrote, and it stretched farther than any man could walk in months of travel. The people who lived there were called Scythians by the Greeks, though that name covered many different tribes, many different peoples, united mainly by their way of life. They were horse nomads, pastoralists, moving with their herds across seasonal ranges that spanned hundreds of miles. They lived in felt tents that could be dismantled in hours and loaded onto wagons. They owned no land in the way Greeks understood ownership. The steppe belonged to whoever could use it, defend it, survive its harsh winters and burning summers. From a Greek perspective, these people barely qualified as civilized. They had no cities, no written language, no marble temples or philosophical schools. They wore trousers, which Greeks found absurd and effeminate, despite the obvious practicality for riding. They drank mare's milk fermented into a mildly alcoholic beverage. They buried their dead in massive mounds called kurgans that rose from the flat steppe like earthen pyramids. They covered themselves in tattoos and gold ornaments. They were, in short, barbarians. But they were barbarians who had mastered warfare on horseback with such skill that they dominated the Eurasian steppe for centuries. They were barbarians who traded with Greeks, Persians, Chinese, managing commercial networks that spanned continents. They were barbarians who created art of stunning sophistication, goldwork that modern eyes still find beautiful, and they were barbarians whose society made room for female warriors in ways that Greek civilization never could. Herodotus recorded a story the Scythians told about their origins. Long ago, the tale went, a tribe of Amazons had been defeated in battle with the Greeks. The survivors fled north across the Black Sea, eventually encountering young Scythian men. At first, the two groups eyed each other with suspicion, but gradually, communication developed. The Scythian men learned that these women were warriors, that they could ride and shoot and fight. The women learned that these men, unlike Greeks, seemed to accept female martial prowess without horror. Eventually, intermarriage occurred. The Amazon women insisted they would not adopt Scythian women's ways, would not abandon their weapons, would not become domestic creatures. The Scythian men agreed. Together, they rode east, away from established Scythian territories, and founded a new people called Sarmatians. These people, Herodotus reported, maintained the old Amazon customs. Their women rode to war alongside men. No Sarmatian woman married until she had killed an enemy in battle. Some women, he added with evident disbelief, never married because they proved so successful at warfare that they saw no reason to stop. Was this story true? Almost certainly not, at least not literally, but it pointed towards something that was true, something that archaeology would eventually confirm. On the Eurasian steppe, in Scythian and Sarmatian cultures, women sometimes fought. Not often, not the majority, not in the all-female societies of Greek imagination, but regularly enough, commonly enough, accepted enough that it registered in Greek consciousness as something remarkable, something that needed explaining through tales of Amazon ancestry. The steppe made this possible in ways that Mediterranean societies could not imagine. Here was space beyond measure, resources that came from animal herds rather than fixed farms, a life of constant movement rather than settled existence. Here, every able body mattered, because survival depended on mobility, on the ability to fight or flee, on maintaining herds against competitors both animal and human. Here, apparently, some women discovered they could be warriors. And here, evidently, their societies allowed it. The truth of the Amazons lay not in cities of women ruling over subjugated men, not in breast mutilation or annual mating rituals, not in divine descent from Ares and Harmonia. The truth lay in kurgan graves scattered across the steppe, in skeletal remains that would not be properly studied for another 2,000 years, in a way of life so different from urban civilization that Greeks could only process it as myth. The Amazons were real, they just were not what the Greeks imagined. The horse people. To understand the women who rode to war, you must first understand the people who made the horse an extension of human will. The Scythians and their kin lived in symbiosis with horses so complete that Greek observers sometimes wondered if they were separate species at all. They seemed born in the saddle, growing up on horseback, spending more time mounted than on foot. Children learned to ride before they learned to run properly. A Scythian infant might be placed on a horse's back before its first birthday, held steady by an adult, learning the rhythm of equine movement before learning to walk. By age 3 or 4, children rode alone, small hands gripping mane, small legs wrapped around broad backs. By age 7 or 8, they were competent riders. By adolescence, they were centaurs, human and horse merged into single deadly units. The horses themselves were unlike Greek breeds, shorter, stockier, with thick coats that could survive steppe winters. They possessed endurance rather than speed. A Scythian horse could survive on poor grazing, could go days with minimal water, could carry a rider for 12 or 14 hours without collapsing. They were not beautiful by Mediterranean standards, but they were perfect for the steppe, shaped by generations of harsh selection to be tough, resilient, adaptable. The Scythians lived in camps that moved with the seasons. In summer, they followed their herds north and west, where grass grew thick and water ran abundant. In winter, they moved south and east, seeking shelter from winds that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Their homes were felt tents, circular structures built around wooden frames, insulated with layers of wool pressed so tight that rain could not penetrate. Inside, despite external cold, warmth could be maintained with small fires, with body heat, with the simple physics of insulation. These tents could be erected or dismantled in under an hour. Everything a family owned had to be portable, had to fit onto wagons or pack animals. Furniture was minimal. Possessions were functional. The Scythians valued gold ornaments and fine weapons, but they could not accumulate the clutter that settled cultures gathered. They owned what they could carry, and they carried what they needed to survive. Their diet centered on animal products, mutton and horse meat, consumed fresh when animals were slaughtered or dried into strips that kept for months. Mare's milk, drunk fresh or fermented into kumis, that slightly alcoholic beverage that Greeks found disgusting, but which provided nutrition and hydration. Cheese made from sheep and goat milk, occasionally grain, traded from farming peoples to the south. But bread was a luxury, not a staple. Blood, sometimes drained from living horses, and mixed with milk for a protein-rich drink that required no killing. They wore practical clothing, designed for riding and extreme weather. Trousers, which Greeks mocked, but which made infinitely more sense on horseback than robes or tunics. Long coats that reached to the knees, often decorated with elaborate embroidery or metal plaques. Felt boots that could be stuffed with grass for additional warmth. Pointed caps that protected heads from sun and cold. Both men and women dressed similarly because both needed the same protection, the same mobility. Warfare was their profession and their sport. Scythian boys trained as archers from the moment they could pull a small bow. They learned to shoot from horseback, mastering the technique of releasing arrows at full gallop, timing the shot for the moment when all four hooves left the ground and the horse's motion stabilized. They learned to feign retreat, to draw enemies into pursuit, then wheel suddenly and fire backward over the horse's rump, a technique called the Parthian shot that would terrorize settled armies for centuries. They perfected hit-and-run tactics that made them nearly impossible to defeat. A Scythian army never stood and fought unless cornered. They circled, harassed, struck from unexpected angles, disappeared into the steppes' vastness before organized retaliation could occur. They poisoned their arrows with snake venom and rotted blood. They used composite bows made from wood, horn, and sinew that could drive arrows through armor at 50 paces. They were, in short, a military nightmare for any army organized around heavy infantry and set-piece battles. But they were not merely warriors, they were artists who worked in gold with extraordinary skill. The treasures buried in Kurgan graves included golden combs, belt buckles, sword scabbards, cups, all decorated with intricate animal motifs. Stags leaping, eagles hunting, griffins snarling, rendered with detail and dynamism that modern jewelers respect. They traded this gold work across continents, their artistic style influencing Persian, Greek, and Chinese aesthetics. They were also deeply religious, though their beliefs seemed alien to Greeks. They worshipped sky gods and earth goddesses. They practiced divination, reading the future in smoke and flames and the arrangement of sticks. They believed in an afterlife that resembled this life, which explained why they buried their dead with horses, weapons, food, everything needed for the journey ahead. They consumed hemp, burning it in enclosed tents and inhaling the smoke until they reached altered states of consciousness. They scalped enemies, tanning the scalps and wearing them as trophies, or using them as towels, a practice that horrified even battle-hardened Greeks. Their society was tribal, but not simple. Chiefs ruled through a combination of martial prowess, wealth, and lineage. Decisions were made communally, at gatherings where warriors debated courses of action. Status came from success in war and raiding, from accumulating herds and gold, from demonstrating skill and courage. A man or woman who could ride well, shoot accurately, and returned from raids with plunder earned respect regardless of birth. And here was the crucial point. In this mobile, martial society, where every warrior mattered and strength was the primary measure of worth, some women discovered they could compete. Not all women, not even most, but enough. Enough that when Greeks encountered Scythian tribes, they sometimes saw women in armor. Enough that the stories circulated, grew, transformed into legends of Amazon cities and all-female societies. The seed of truth was there. Women could be warriors. On the steppe, unlike in Greece, this possibility was real. Bones don't lie. For 2,000 years, the Amazon remained myth. Greek stories were read as fiction, as moral tales, as propaganda about gender and civilization. Serious historians dismissed the warrior women as literary inventions. Archaeological expeditions across the 19th and early 20th centuries found plenty of Scythian graves, plenty of weapons, plenty of evidence for a sophisticated nomadic culture. But the assumption held firm. The warrior burials contained men. Warriors were men. Therefore, anyone buried with weapons must be male. This assumption proved difficult to dislodge because skeletal sex determination is harder than it appears. Without soft tissue, without DNA analysis, without modern techniques, archaeologists relied on secondary sexual characteristics. Broader hips suggested female, thicker bones suggested male. But these traits overlap. Young males can have gracile skeletons. Older females can have robust bones. Burial goods helped, beads and jewelry suggesting women, weapons suggesting men, except when they didn't. When a skeleton showed female characteristics, but lay beside an iron sword and bronze arrowheads, the conclusion was simple. We made a mistake in sex determination. This must be male after all. The change came gradually, beginning in the 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s and 1990s as new techniques became available. Bioarchaeologists began examining skeletons more carefully, measuring pelvic structures with greater precision, studying bone development with better understanding. DNA analysis, when preservation allowed, could determine sex with certainty, and slowly, uncomfortably, a new picture emerged. Some of those warrior burials were definitely female. Not all, not the majority, but a significant minority. Estimates vary by region and time period, but across the Eurasian steppe, roughly 20 to 30% of identified warrior burials contain women. 20 to 30%. That number was high enough to be systematic, rather than exceptional, common enough to represent cultural acceptance rather than rare aberration. The graves tell detailed stories. Near the Pokrovka River in southern Russia, archaeologists excavated a kurgan containing a woman approximately 45 years old at death. She lay on her back in a timber chamber, surrounded by grave goods that included a bronze arrowhead embedded in her leg bone, evidence of a wound that had healed years before her death. Beside her, a quiver with iron arrowheads, an iron sword, a bronze mirror, beads, a sacrifice sheep. This woman had been wounded in combat, had survived, had lived decades more, and had been buried with full warrior honors. Another burial, this one from Kazakhstan, held a teenage girl, perhaps 16 years old. An iron dagger lay at her side, bronze arrowheads scattered around her body. Her skeleton showed no battle trauma, suggesting she died of illness or accident rather than combat. But someone had deemed her worthy of warrior burial, had sent her into the afterlife armed and ready to fight. She had been trained, she had been accepted. Death had come before she could prove herself in battle, but her community had honored her as a warrior regardless. A third grave, from the Altai Mountains, contained a woman in her 20s buried in permafrost that preserved not just bones but soft tissue, tattoos, clothing. She wore silk and wool, Chinese luxury goods that indicated high status. 2 horses accompanied her, sacrificed for the journey ahead, and there, unmistakably, weapons, a knife, a bow case, evidence that this elite woman had also been a warrior, or at least had adopted warrior identity. The skeletal evidence went beyond grave goods. Bones bear the marks of the lives they lived. Heavy muscle attachments indicate repetitive activities. Archery leaves specific signs: enlarged left shoulder, altered right elbow, sometimes asymmetric bone development from the stress of repeatedly drawing a powerful bow. Horse riding shapes the pelvis and leg bones in characteristic ways. Battle trauma, healed or fatal, marks violence on the skeleton itself. Female skeletons from warrior burials showed these markers. Their bones demonstrated archery practice, riding, sometimes healed wounds from combat. A woman buried near the Black Sea had a bronze arrowhead lodged in her lower spine, a wound that had calcified around the foreign object, proving she had survived being shot in the back, probably while fleeing battle, and had lived months or years afterward before dying from unrelated causes. Her skeleton told a story of violence survived, of a warrior woman who had known battle intimately. Not all female warrior burials contained weapons. Some held horse equipment, suggesting these women's warrior identity came through horsemanship rather than direct combat. Others contained bronze mirrors alongside arrowheads, combining feminine objects with martial ones in ways that resisted simple categorization. These women were not trying to become men. They were not rejecting femininity. They were combining gender identities in ways Mediterranean societies could not imagine. The archaeological evidence forced a recalibration. The Amazons, it turned out, had a basis in reality, not cities ruled by women, not breast mutilation or male subjugation, but real warrior women, riding the steppe, shooting bows from horseback, occasionally dying in battle or from battle wounds, and being buried with the weapons that had defined their lives. The Greeks had encountered these women, had heard stories about them, and had transformed reality into myth. They had exaggerated, distorted, filtered everything through their own gender anxieties. But the core was true. Warrior women existed. For scholars who had dismissed the Amazon as pure fantasy, this revelation was profound. For women looking for historical precedents of female martial prowess, it was validating. For anyone interested in human possibility, it was a reminder that culture shapes what seems natural, that different societies can organize gender in radically different ways, that the impossible might just be the unfamiliar seen through prejudiced eyes. The bones did not lie. They told a story Greek historians had recorded but later generations had disbelieved. They confirmed that on the Eurasian steppe, in Scythian and Sarmatian cultures, some women were warriors. Not all women, not even most. But enough. More than enough to justify the legend. The priestess warrior. She was approximately 35 years old when she died, sometime in the 4th century BC. Her grave sat beneath a kurgan near the Volga River, not the largest mound in the area but substantial, indicating a person of importance. When archaeologists excavated the burial chamber in 1997, they found her lying on her left side, knees slightly bent, hands positioned near her face. She had been placed carefully, respectfully, surrounded by objects that told the story of who she had been. To her right lay a bow case containing the remains of a composite bow. The wood had rotted away over 2,000 years, but the bone-reinforcing plates remained, along with bronze fittings. Below the bow case, a quiver had once held arrows. 23 bronze arrowheads scattered around the grave indicated how many arrows had been buried with her. These were war arrows, not hunting arrows, their points designed to penetrate armor or flesh. Near her left hand, someone had placed a bronze mirror, its reflecting surface still smooth despite millennia in earth. Beside it, carnelian and glass beads that had once formed a necklace, or perhaps decorated clothing. A bronze bracelet encircled the bones of her right wrist. A small knife, more tool than weapon, lay near her knee. But the objects that made her burial unique sat near her head. Chalk pieces, white and carefully shaped, small painted stones, a collection of unusual shells that must have been traded from distant seas. These items suggested ritual practice, divination perhaps, or healing magic, combined with the mirror, which had spiritual as well as practical significance in Scythian culture. They indicated a woman who had served religious functions for her community. She was, the archaeologists concluded, both priestess and warrior. The combination was not contradiction but complement. In Scythian society, spiritual power and martial prowess could exist in the same person, could reinforce each other, could make someone particularly valuable to their tribe. Her skeleton told more of the story. She had been tall for a Scythian woman, approximately 5 feet 6 inches, robust and strong. Her arm bones showed the asymmetric development typical of archers. The left shoulder enlarged from holding the bow, the right elbow altered from repeatedly drawing the string. Her leg bones indicated a lifetime on horseback, pelvis slightly modified by years in the saddle. She had not been sedentary. She had not spent her life in domestic tasks. She had ridden and fought and lived the mobile existence of a steppe nomad. She bore scars, a healed fracture on her left forearm, the kind of defensive wound suffered when raising an arm to block a blow or falling from a horse. Another healed break on her right collarbone, again consistent with riding accidents or close combat. These were old injuries, years healed when she died. Whatever violence had caused them, she had recovered, had continued her warrior life. But she had not died violently. No battle trauma marked her skeleton, no embedded arrowheads, no cut marks from blades, no crushing injuries from clubs. She had probably died of illness or perhaps childbirth, though determining exact cause of death from ancient bones remains difficult. Her community had mourned her. The care taken in burial, the valuable grave goods, the prominent kurgan all indicated respect, loss, a life considered significant. Someone had closed her eyes. Someone had positioned her body. Someone had selected her most important possessions to accompany her into the afterlife. Someone had chosen the bow and arrows because she had been a warrior. Someone had included the chalk and stones and shells because she had been a priestess. Someone had added the mirror and beads because she had been a woman. All these identities, layered together, making her who she was. She was buried alone, without a husband, without children identified in the grave. This might mean she had never married, had chosen warrior life over domestic life, as Herodotus claimed some Sarmatian women did. Or it might mean her family had been buried elsewhere, in other kurgans, following patterns we do not fully understand. The absence of others in her grave proves nothing except that she, herself, was important enough to merit individual burial in a prominent location. 2,300 years later, archaeologists brushing dirt from her bones recognized what they had found. Not a myth, not an Amazon in the Greek sense, but a real woman who had combined roles in ways that Mediterranean societies would have found impossible, who had been both spiritual leader and warrior, who had earned respect and status through her abilities, who had mattered enough to her people that they built a mound to mark her passing. She had no name that survived. No tales were told about her specific deeds. She left no mark on written history. But she existed. She rode across the steppe with bow in hand and prayers on her lips. She was real, and she was one of many. You ride to battle. The alarm comes at dawn. Not shouted words, but the sound every nomad dreads. The thunder of approaching horses. Too many horses. Moving too fast. Coming from the wrong direction. Raiders. The Sarmatian camp erupts into organized chaos. You are already reaching for your armor before you are fully awake. Your fingers know the movements without thought. Leather chest protector first, the panels of hardened hide that can turn a glancing blade. Over this, a coat of overlapping bronze scales sewn onto felt, heavy but effective, covering your torso and upper arms. Your helmet, bronze with cheek guards, settled onto your head. You tighten the chin strap. Everything must be secure. Loose armor kills as surely as enemy weapons. Your weapons come next. Bow case slung across your back. The powerful composite bow that took 3 years to cure properly, that can drive an arrow through a man at 70 paces. Your quiver, riding at your hip, 25 arrows with iron points. Your sword, a short blade designed for close work. Though you pray you will not need it. If you need your sword, something has gone terribly wrong. Your knife, strapped to your thigh, the tool you use for everything from cutting rope to butchering meat to ending a wounded enemy's suffering. Outside, your mare is already saddled. Someone, your younger sister perhaps, has prepared her while you armed yourself. The horse dances, nervous, catching the human anxiety. You run your hand down her neck, speaking soft words in the language you and she have shared since you trained her as a filly. She steadies slightly, not calm, but controlled. Good enough. Around you, 50 warriors are mounting up. Men and women both, though no one pays attention to who has which anatomy. That matters in camp, in tents, in private moments. Here, now, with enemies approaching, it matters only who can ride and shoot. You can do both. You have done both since you were 8 years old. You have killed 3 men in your life. Though you try not to think about their faces, about the moment the light left their eyes. The war leader is a woman named Tirga Tau. She sits her horse like she was born there, which in a sense she was. She has survived 40 winters, an impressive age on the steppe. Scars map her exposed arms. She has killed dozens. Everyone respects her without question. When she raises her fist, the warband falls silent. When she points east, everyone knows what she means. The enemy comes from that direction. You will ride to meet them. The thunder grows louder. Over the horizon, dust rises. You see them now, perhaps 100 riders in loose formation. Another tribe, another people, seeking to raid the camp, to steal horses and women and children, to take what they can before disappearing back into the steppe's anonymity. They have made a mistake. They thought this would be easy. They will learn otherwise. Tirgatau screams, a sound that starts in her belly and tears from her throat. Wordless fury and challenge. The entire warband echoes her. You find your own voice joining the cry, adding to the wall of sound that rolls across the grass toward the approaching raiders. Your mare leaps forward, matching the pace of the horses around her. 50 riders become a single organism, a wave of flesh and bronze and iron and rage. The distance closes. 500 paces, 400, 300. You can see faces now. See enemy warriors realizing this will not be the easy raid they expected. Some are already wheeling away, deciding discretion beats valor. Others commit, lowering lances, preparing for impact. Tirgatau's arm slashes down. The warband splits, flowing around the raiders like water around stone. This is what hours of training, years of riding together, creates. You know where every other rider will be without looking. You know when to veer left, when to accelerate, when to draw your bow. 200 paces. The bow comes off your shoulder. Your hands string it in 2 smooth motions, muscle memory making you efficient. First arrow from the quiver, knocked, drawn. Your mare's rhythm becomes your rhythm. 4 beats to the stride. You release on the 3rd beat, when all 4 hooves are off the ground, when the motion steadies for that single instant. The arrow flies. You do not watch where it goes. Already, you are reaching for the 2nd shaft. Already you are tracking a new target. A raider in leather armor charging toward you. Draw. Release. The raider jerks, falls from his horse. You do not know if you killed him or merely wounded him. It does not matter. He is down. He is no longer a threat. The warband circles the raiders like wolves around wounded elk. You shoot again and again, timing each release to the horse's gait, your body and the mare's body moving as one. Around you, other arrows fly. Raider horses scream and fall. Raider warriors tumble to the earth. Some try to shoot back, but they are disorganized, panicked. They cannot match the discipline of your warband. One raider breaks through, charging directly at you. You can see his eyes, wide with desperation or courage or both. He has a lance, long and iron-tipped. In 3 heartbeats, he will be close enough to use it. You have time for one shot. Only one. You draw. Your mare veers right without command, responding to the slight pressure of your knees. The raider's lance passes where you would have been. You release. The arrow takes him in the chest. He drops the lance. His hands clutch at the shaft protruding from his body. He falls. His horse runs on without him. The battle, if you can call it that, lasts perhaps 10 minutes. By the end, 20 raiders lie dead or dying on the grass. The rest have fled, scattered in all directions. Your warband does not pursue. You have won. The camp is safe. That is sufficient. Tirga Tau raises her fist again. The warband circles back toward camp, still alert, still watching horizons. You become aware, suddenly, that you are shaking. Adrenaline drains away, leaving exhaustion. Your arms hurt. Your fingers are bloody, where the bowstring has worn through calluses. Your mare is covered in sweat, breathing hard. She deserves rest, fresh grass, your gratitude for carrying you through danger one more time. As you ride back, you think about the raider you shot at close range, about his eyes meeting yours in that final moment. You try to feel something. Guilt, perhaps, or triumph. But mostly you feel tired and alive. You are 19 years old. This was your 7th battle. It will not be your last. This is the life you were born into, the life you have chosen, the only life that makes sense on the steppe where weakness means death and strength, regardless of whether it comes from male or female body, means survival. You are not an Amazon in the Greek sense. You are not impossible. You are simply necessary. And tonight, when you clean your weapons and check your armor and prepare for the next threat that will inevitably come, you will not question whether you belong in this role. The question never arises. You are a warrior because your people need warriors, and you can do the work. Nothing more complex than that. Nothing more simple than that. Sisters and mothers, warriors and wives. The question that troubled Greek minds, the question that seemed to invalidate any possibility of real warrior women, was this: how could a woman bear and raise children while also training and fighting? The two roles seemed fundamentally incompatible. Pregnancy made women vulnerable. Infant care demanded constant attention. How could someone who must nurse a child also ride to battle? The answer the Greeks could imagine was that Amazons rejected motherhood entirely, killed or exiled male children, maintained their society through some unnatural alternative to family structure. The answer the steppe provided was simpler and more radical. Both roles could coexist because the society was organized to make them coexist. Nomadic life created possibilities that settled agricultural societies could not imagine. Start with the economics of pastoralism. In agricultural societies, muscle power produces wealth. Strong men plough fields, plant crops, harvest grain. Physical strength translates directly to economic output. Women, generally smaller and with less upper body strength than men, contribute less to the primary economic activity. This creates a practical basis for gender hierarchy. Men produce more food, therefore men hold more power. But on the steppe, wealth came from herds. Horses, sheep, cattle, goats. These animals required tending, protecting, moving between pastures, but not the kind of sustained heavy labor that farming demanded. A skilled rider could manage large numbers of animals. Size mattered less than skill, experience, knowledge of animal behavior. Women could perform these tasks as effectively as men. Economic contribution was more equitable, providing foundation for more equitable social status. Then consider warfare. Agricultural societies fight over land, over fixed resources. They build fortifications, conduct sieges, wage wars of position where heavy infantry dominates. Large men with substantial strength hold advantage in this type of combat. But steppe warfare was about mobility, about archery from horseback, about stamina and skill rather than raw power. A composite bow required technique more than muscle. A small, skilled archer could be as deadly as a large one, sometimes more deadly because a lighter rider moved faster. Women could, with training, match male warriors in the type of combat the steppe required. Add to this the constant military pressure nomadic peoples faced. Tribal warfare was endemic. Raids came from all directions. Every warrior mattered. A society that excluded half its adult population from military roles operated at significant disadvantage compared to societies that trained both sexes to fight. The mathematics were simple. More warriors meant better survival odds. If women could learn to shoot and ride effectively, refusing to train them was wasteful and potentially fatal. Pregnancy complicated, but did not eliminate, female warrior participation. A woman who became pregnant did not fight in her final months, or immediately after giving birth. This was practical necessity, but pregnancy lasts 9 months. Recovery takes weeks or months more. Compared to a warrior's active years spanning perhaps from age 15 to 40, this represented temporary, rather than permanent withdrawal from combat roles. A woman might bear 4 or 5 children across 25 years, and still spend most of that time able to train and fight. Childcare worked differently in nomadic societies than in settled ones. Children were raised communally, cared for by extended family networks that included grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, elderly members of the tribe who could no longer ride to war, but could certainly watch infants. A woman did not have to be present constantly to raise her children. Others could nurse infants, mother's milk supplemented by mare's milk, or the milk of sheep and goats. The biological requirement that bound mother and infant lasted months, not years. After weaning, children became the responsibility of the whole tribe. Moreover, Scythian and Sarmatian women did not maintain Greek standards of female seclusion. They were not confined to domestic spaces, forbidden from appearing in public, restricted in their movements and activities. They rode horses as daily necessity. They managed herds. They participated in hunts. They travelled with their tribes across seasonal ranges. The physical capabilities required for these activities overlapped significantly with the capabilities needed for warfare. A woman who could ride all day, managing cattle, could ride all day pursuing enemies. A woman who could shoot rabbits for the cooking pot could shoot raiders threatening her family. The archaeological evidence suggests female warriors were minority, but accepted minority. Perhaps 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 Scythian warriors was female, based on the burial evidence. This was not a society where all women fought, but one where some women fought and faced no particular stigma for doing so. The choice, or perhaps the circumstance, that led individual women to warrior roles rather than purely domestic roles likely varied. Personal inclination, family need, chance events that revealed particular aptitude, perhaps even spiritual calling in cases like the priestess warrior. Some women probably fought for limited periods, earning warrior status through specific campaigns before transitioning to other roles. Others might have maintained warrior identity throughout their active years. Still others combined roles, fighting seasonally when raids were likely, managing herds and family during quieter periods. The society was flexible enough to accommodate different patterns. What the steppe peoples understood, what Greek civilization could not accept, was that gender roles are cultural constructs, maintained by social pressure rather than biological imperatives. Yes, women bear children and men do not. Yes, men average larger and stronger than women, but these facts do not determine destiny in any simple way. Societies can organize around them in countless different ways, can create spaces where physical differences matter less, can value skills that both sexes can develop. The Amazons that Greeks encountered were not the all-female societies of legend. They were Scythian and Sarmatian tribes, where some women were warriors, where the sight of a woman in armor was unusual but not impossible, where social organization made room for female martial participation. The Greeks, filtering this reality through their own rigid gender assumptions, transformed it into myth. They amplified, exaggerated, created cities of women and stories of breast mutilation because they could not imagine the simpler truth. That in the right circumstances, with the right social structure, women could be warriors while still being women, could fight while still bearing children, could combine identities that Greek culture insisted were mutually exclusive. The step proved it was possible. Not easy, not common, but possible. And that possibility, more than any city of Amazons, more than any divine descent, was what truly threatened patriarchal civilization. Because if it was possible on the steppe, then perhaps with different social choices, different cultural values, different economic structures, it could be possible anywhere. The Amazon was not myth made real. She was reality that myth could not contain. The ninth labor. The hero stood at the threshold of impossibility. Heracles, strongest of mortals, son of Zeus, had already accomplished 8 labors that would have killed ordinary men a dozen times over. He had strangled the Nemean lion with his bare hands. He had slain the 9-headed Hydra. He had captured the golden hind of Artemis, cleaned the Augean stables, driven off the Stymphalian birds, captured the Cretan bull, stolen the mares of Diomedes, obtained the girdle of Hippolyta. Wait, no, that last one was still ahead of him. That was the 9th labor, the one that would bring him into collision with the most dangerous women in the world. King Eurystheus, who had devised these impossible tasks, had a daughter named Admete. She desired the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a magical girdle given to the Amazon queen by Ares himself as symbol of her authority over all warrior women. It was said to grant its wearer invincibility in battle, or perhaps simply the respect and obedience of the Amazon nation. Admet wanted it. Eurystheus commanded Heracles to obtain it. The hero had no choice but to obey. So Heracles gathered companions and sailed north across the Aegean, through the Hellespont, into the Black Sea toward Themyscira. The journey took weeks. Storm winds battered the ship. Strange creatures rose from depths to observe these Greeks, daring to enter waters at the edge of the known world. But Heracles was favoured by the gods, or at least by his father Zeus, and the ship eventually reached the coast where the Amazons dwelt. What happened next depends on which version of the story you believe. The Greeks could never quite agree on whether this labour succeeded through violence or deception, whether blood was shed or words were exchanged, whether Hippolyta died or survived. The ambiguity itself tells us something. The Greeks wanted the Amazon queen defeated, but could not quite decide how that defeat should unfold. In one version, the gentler version, Hippolyta came to meet Heracles when his ship arrived. She had heard of this hero, this son of Zeus who had accomplished impossible deeds. She was curious. She was perhaps attracted. The stories hint at romance, at the Amazon queen looking upon the strongest man in the world and feeling something beyond mere political interest. They talked. Heracles explained his mission, told her about Eurystheus and Admete and the command he could not refuse. Hippolyta listened, and then, moved by the hero's honesty or his reputation, or perhaps that rumoured attraction, she agreed. She would give him the belt willingly. No battle necessary, no violence required. But Hera, Zeus's jealous wife, who hated Heracles for being her husband's bastard son, could not allow success to come so easily. She disguised herself as an Amazon warrior and spread rumours through Themyscira. The Greeks had come to kidnap the queen, she whispered. They meant to abduct Hippolyta, to take her back to Greece as a slave. The lie spread like wildfire, Amazon warriors armed themselves, mounted horses, prepared to defend their queen. When Heracles saw armed Amazons approaching, he assumed betrayal. He thought Hippolyta had deceived him, had lured him into false security before attacking. In the confusion, in the moment of misunderstanding manufactured by divine malice, violence erupted. Swords were drawn, arrows flew, and in the chaos, depending on which poet tells the tale, either Heracles killed Hippolyta to claim the belt from her corpse, or one of his companions killed her, or she survived but the belt was taken by force. The other version dispensed with romance entirely. In this telling, Heracles arrived at Themyscira, ready for war. He challenged Hippolyta to single combat. The Amazon queen, proud and fearless, accepted. They fought on the beach where land met sea, hero against warrior queen, demigod against daughter of Ares. The battle raged for hours. Hippolyta was skilled beyond measure, fast and deadly, her spear finding gaps in Heracles' defense. But the hero was stronger, more durable, capable of absorbing wounds that would fell normal warriors. Eventually, inevitably, his club found her head. She fell. He took the belt from her dying body. Some versions add that Heracles killed other Amazon warriors who came to their queen's defense. Melanippe, Hippolyta's sister, was captured or killed. Antiope, another sister, was taken as prize by Theseus, who had accompanied Heracles on this labour. The Greeks sailed away with the belt and their captives, leaving Themyscira in mourning, leaving the Amazon nation leaderless, leaving a wound that would fester into the next great confrontation between Greeks and warrior women. What strikes you, listening to these stories, is how the death of Hippolyta troubles the narrative. Greek heroes killed many foes. Heracles murdered his own wife and children in a fit of madness sent by Hera. Violence was his tool, his purpose, his destiny. Yet the death of the Amazon queen, in every version, carries weight beyond normal heroic killing. The stories linger on it, try to justify it, offer alternatives where maybe she survived, maybe the belt was given freely, maybe violence was not necessary. Perhaps this reveals Greek unease with the Amazon concept. Killing male enemies was glorious. Killing female enemies, even female warriors, felt wrong somehow, felt like violation of natural order rather than restoration of it. The Amazons needed to be defeated for patriarchal civilization to remain secure. But that defeat came at cost, left stain, created tragedy rather than simple triumph. Hippolyta died, in most versions. The belt went to Admet, who probably wore it to parties and received compliments and never understood what its acquisition had cost. Heracles completed his 9th labour and moved on to the 10th, herding the cattle of Geryon. The Amazons buried their queen and chose a new leader and prepared, unknowingly, for the next Greek hero who would bring them grief. The cycle of violence had only begun. The Athenian bride. Theseus was Athens' greatest hero before heroes became tiresome. He had killed the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Knossos, freeing Athens from the terrible tribute of youths and maidens sent to feed the bull-headed monster. He had united Attica under Athenian rule, transforming scattered villages into a proper city-state. He had established laws, created institutions, built the foundations of Athenian democracy. He was everything a hero should be: brave, clever, strong, politically savvy. He was also, like most heroes, deeply flawed in his treatment of women. When Heracles sailed to Themyscira for the 9th labour, Theseus accompanied him as friend and ally. There, according to most versions, Theseus encountered Antiope, sister of Queen Hippolyta. Some stories say he kidnapped her. Others claim she fell in love with him and left willingly, abandoning her Amazon sisters for this Greek hero. The second version feels suspiciously like justification, the kind of story men tell when they take women against their will, and need to believe consent existed. Theseus brought Antiope back to Athens. He made her his wife, or perhaps his concubine, the distinction unclear in sources. He may have loved her, in his way. She bore him a son, Hippolytus, named after her dead sister. For a time, perhaps, they were happy as an Amazon princess could be living in the heart of Greek patriarchal civilization, far from the steppe and horses and freedom. But Antiope's abduction had consequences. The Amazons did not forget. They did not forgive. They did not accept that one of their queens, one of their princesses, could be stolen by Greeks without response. So they prepared for war. The Amazon invasion of Athens stands as one of the most dramatic episodes in Greek mythology. Remarkable because it brings the warrior women out of distant lands into the very heart of Greek civilization. They were not content to remain at the edges of the known world. They brought war to Athens itself. The army that assembled was massive, by Amazon standards. Thousands of warrior women, according to the sources, though numbers in ancient texts are always suspect. They came on horseback, armed with bows and spears and axes, wearing armor of leather and bronze. They marched or rode, depending on terrain, across Thrace, through Thessaly, into Boeotia. Greek cities along their route watched in horror as this impossible army passed. Some tried to stop them. The Amazons scattered those forces easily, intent on a single goal, Athens. They arrived in Attica in summer, when crops grew tall and the city baked under Mediterranean sun. They did not lay siege in the traditional sense. Instead, they occupied the hills surrounding Athens. They controlled the countryside. They camped on the Areopagus, the hill of Ares, as if claiming that sacred ground for their divine patron. They may have even occupied parts of the Acropolis itself before being driven back, though sources differ on this detail. The siege lasted 4 months according to Plutarch, who wrote about it centuries later, compiling older sources and oral traditions. 4 months of the mightiest city in Greece held hostage by women. 4 months of shame for Athenian men who could not drive off this female army. 4 months of proving that the Amazons were not myth, not metaphor, but real military threat. The battles that occurred were desperate. The Athenians, fighting for their homes and their honour, threw everything at the Amazon army. They sallied from the city gates in organised phalanx formations. They tried to break the Amazon siege lines, but the warrior women fought with skill and fury, their mobility and archery negating the advantages of Greek heavy infantry. Again and again, Athenian attacks were repulsed. The conflict centred around the return of Antiope. The Amazons demanded her back. Theseus refused. Whether Antiope wanted to return is a question the male sources never adequately address. She had a son now, a Greek son, Hippolytus. She had made a life in Athens, however constrained. Did she long for the steppe and the freedom of her former existence? Or had she truly chosen Theseus and Greek civilization? We will never know, because no one thought to preserve her voice, her choice, her perspective. What we know is that eventually, through a combination of Athenian military effort and perhaps negotiation, perhaps divine intervention, the siege broke. Some versions say the Amazons were defeated in a final battle near the Pnyx, that hill where Athenian citizens gathered for assembly. Other versions suggest a treaty was negotiated, that the Amazons agreed to leave in exchange for something, perhaps Antiope's wish to stay, perhaps tribute, perhaps simply the exhaustion of both sides. In the most tragic versions, Antiope died during the siege. She fought, some sources claim, though they cannot agree on which side she fought for. Did she defend Athens, her adopted home, against her former sisters? Or did she try to return to the Amazons, only to be killed in the confusion of battle? One dramatic version has her dying while trying to protect Theseus from an Amazon arrow, literally placing her body between her captor husband and her warrior sisters. Another has her accidentally killed by Amazon archers, who did not recognize her in Greek clothing. A third claims Theseus himself killed her when she tried to leave him, though this version was usually suppressed because it made the hero look monstrous. However, she died. Antiope's death ended the siege. The Amazons departed, taking their dead with them, returning north and east to their distant homelands. They left Athens intact but shaken. They had proven they could reach the heart of Greece, could threaten the mightiest city, could bring war even here. The Athenians never forgot. They commemorated the Amazon invasion in art, carved it into temple friezes, painted it on countless vases. They needed to remember, needed to process, needed to transform their fear into images they could control. The story of Theseus and Antiope is a tragedy of cultures in collision, of a woman caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. It is a tale of love and kidnapping, of choice and compulsion, of identity fractured by impossible circumstances. It reveals how precarious Greek gender order felt, how easily it could be challenged, how much violence was required to maintain it. And it demonstrates that the Amazons were not content to remain mythical, not willing to be symbols only. They insisted on being real, on taking action, on seeking justice, even when that meant invading the most powerful city in Greece. Antiope died far from the steppe. Hippolytus grew up motherless, raised by his father and Athenian tutors, becoming fully Greek, severed from his Amazon heritage. Theseus eventually married someone else, Phaedra, in a union that would bring its own tragic consequences. The Amazons faded back into the distances, into the lands beyond Greek control, but Athens remembered, and the memory ensured that warrior women would never be dismissed, never be forgotten, never quite lose their power to disturb and fascinate Greek imagination. You stand on Athenian walls. You have lived in Athens all your life. Your father is a potter, producing the black figure and red figure vessels that are Athens' pride, exporting them across the Mediterranean, earning enough to keep your family comfortable. You have walked these streets every day of your 23 years. You know every temple, every market stall, every narrow alley. This is your world, your home, the centre of civilization, as far as you are concerned. But today, looking out from the city walls, where you stand with hundreds of other citizens, you wonder if civilization is about to end. The dust rose this morning from the north. At first, the guards thought it might be a merchant caravan, travellers arriving from Thebes or Delphi. Then the reports started filtering in from rural farms. An army, moving fast. Not hoplites in organised formation, but riders. Thousands of riders, flowing across the land like a flood. And they are women. You did not believe it at first. No one did. Women do not make war. Women stay home, manage households, raise children, weave cloth. Women are wives and daughters and mothers. They are not warriors. The natural order forbids it. The gods decree it. Everyone knows this. But the army approaching Athens is female. You can see them now, spread across the plain, like some impossible nightmare. Thousands of horsewomen. Maybe more. Too many to count accurately. They wear armour, leather, and bronze catching sunlight. They carry weapons, bows slung across backs, spears in hands, swords hanging from belts. They move with coordination that speaks of training, of experience, of genuine military capability. Your hands grip the stone wall. The texture is rough, solid, real. You need something real because what you are seeing cannot be real. This must be a dream, a trick of the gods, divine punishment for some collective Athenian sin. But your fellow citizens crowd around you, and they see it too. The impossible army, the women warriors, the Amazons. You have heard stories about Amazons since childhood. Nurses told tales of warrior queens in distant lands. Poets sang of Heracles facing Hippolyta. Artists painted Amazon battles on vases, including vases your father made. But stories are not real. Paintings are not reality. You thought Amazons were myth, metaphor, moral lessons about gender and civilization. You never imagined they existed, could exist, would someday appear outside your city walls. They are making camp. You can see tents rising, not Greek tents, but strange circular structures of felt and wood. Horses, so many horses, being herded into temporary corrals. Cook fires sending smoke into afternoon sky. They are settling in. This is not a raid. This is a siege. Someone near you, an older man with a grey beard, whispers a prayer to Athena, the virgin warrior goddess who protects Athens, who gave the city her name. Surely she will defend against this female army. Surely the goddess will not allow women to conquer her city. But the Amazons on the plain also worship a warrior goddess, Artemis. What happens when divine forces conflict? Which goddess will prevail? You realize you are praying to, your lips moving without conscious thought, begging any god who will listen to make this end. A horn sounds from inside the city. The strategos, the general commanding Athens' defense, is calling assembly. All citizens must gather at the Pnyx to discuss response. You should go. But you cannot tear your eyes from the plain, from the impossible sight that has shattered your understanding of the world. One group of Amazons rides closer, approaching the walls at a trot. They stop just beyond bowshot, perhaps 50 women on horseback. One of them, wearing more elaborate armour, a helmet crowned with horsehair plume, rides forward a few paces more. She shouts something in accented Greek. Her voice carries across the distance. We seek Antiope, princess of the Amazons, taken by Theseus. Return her unharmed, and we depart. Refuse, and we take her by force. The words hang in the air. Around you, citizens mutter in confusion and anger. Antiope. You know who that is, of course. Everyone does. Theseus brought her back from his adventures, made her his woman, fathered a child on her. She lives in the hero's house now, serves him as Greeks think women should serve men. She has become civilized, or so everyone says. Surely she does not want to return to these savages, to this unnatural life of warfare and wandering. The Amazon queen, or general, or whatever title she holds, waits for response. None comes. How could it? No Greek man would negotiate with women. The entire concept is absurd. Theseus will not give up his prize. Athens will not submit to female demands. The standoff stretches, silence broken only by wind and the nervous shifting of horses. Finally, the Amazon turns her mount. The group gallops back toward their camp. You watch them move. Watch how they ride as if human and horse were single creatures. Your father once told you that, in distant lands, barbarians ride horses better than Greeks walk. You thought it was exaggeration. Now you see it is simple truth. Night falls. The Amazon camp glows with hundreds of fires. The city behind you lights, torches and lamps. Two peoples, two civilizations, two entirely different understandings of how the world should work, preparing for confrontation. You remain on the wall past dark, unwilling to return to your safe home, while impossible women camp outside. Your mind races. If women can be warriors, what else might be untrue? What other assumptions, other beliefs, other certainties might collapse if examined too closely? The social order suddenly feels fragile, maintained by agreement rather than nature, vulnerable to anyone who decides to break the rules. You think about the women in your own life. Your mother, raising 4 children, managing household accounts, supervising slaves, never complaining about the limitations placed on her movement, her voice, her choices. Your sister, recently married to a merchant, already pregnant, her life determined by father and husband. Your grandmother, widowed, living with your family because women cannot own property, cannot live independently. These women are not weak. They are not incapable. They are simply constrained by customs that suddenly seem arbitrary rather than natural. Could your mother be a warrior? Could your sister? The thought seems ludicrous. And yet, The Amazons camping beyond the walls were born as helpless as all infants. They learned to ride and fight. They chose, or were taught, a different way of being female. They proved that women can do what Athenian culture insists women cannot do. This realization terrifies you more than the military threat. The army can be defeated, probably, eventually. Athenian hoplites are the finest in Greece. Walls are strong. The city has resources, allies, determination. The Amazons will likely fail to take Athens, but even in failure, they have succeeded in revealing that the world could be different. That revelation cannot be defeated, cannot be erased, will haunt Greek minds forever. A hand touches your shoulder. Your father, looking for you, worried because you did not come home. Come, he says gently. Nothing you can do here. The Strategos and Theseus will handle this. You follow him down from the wall, through dark streets toward home. But you look back once, toward the plain, toward the fires, toward the impossible women who have brought war to Athens. Tomorrow, fighting will probably begin. Men will die. Perhaps Amazons will die. Perhaps, gods forbid, the city will fall. But regardless of military outcome, something has already fallen. Your certainty, your understanding of natural law, your belief that the world must be organized, as Athens organizes it. The Amazons have won something already, something more important than any battle. They have proven they exist, and existence, sometimes, is the most dangerous revolution of all. At the walls of Troy, the war at Troy ground into its 10th year, exhaustion replacing glory, bitterness replacing heroism. The Greeks had been besieging the city for 9 long years, unable to break Trojan walls, unable to go home without victory. Their greatest warrior, Achilles, sulked in his tent after a quarrel with Agamemnon, refusing to fight, letting his comrades die while he nursed his wounded pride. The Trojans, meanwhile, defended their city with increasing desperation, knowing defeat meant death or slavery for everyone they loved. Into this stalemate came Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons. She arrived with 12 companions, all warriors, all veterans, all women who had proven themselves in countless battles on the steppe. Some sources say she came because Priam, king of Troy, promised her great treasure if she would fight for his city. Others claim she was fleeing guilt, having accidentally killed her sister Hippolyta during a hunt, seeking redemption through glorious death in combat. Perhaps both motivations existed. Perhaps she simply wanted to fight the Greeks, to test herself against the legendary warriors of Hellas. Troy welcomed her with desperate relief. A new champion, fresh troops, someone to break the deadlock. The Trojans did not care that she was a woman. They cared only that she might save them. Penthesilea did not disappoint. The next morning, she rode out from Troy's Scaean gate at the head of her small war band. Behind her, Trojan warriors followed, encouraged by her presence, hoping her arrival signaled a shift in fortune. The Greeks, camped on the plain, watched this new force approach and prepared for battle. The fighting that followed demonstrated why the Amazons held such mythological power in Greek imagination. Penthesilea fought like a force of nature. She wore armor that shone like sunlight on water. She wielded a double-headed axe with devastating skill. She rode her horse through Greek ranks, striking down warriors whose names would otherwise be forgotten, creating havoc wherever she appeared. Around her, her 12 Amazon companions fought with equal fury, their archery and mobility making them far more dangerous than their small numbers suggested. Greek warriors fell to Amazon weapons. Molion, son of Deucalion, Persinus, Ilissos. These were not great heroes, but solid fighters, men who had survived 9 years of brutal warfare, only to die at the hands of female warriors from a distant land. The Greeks were shocked, then frightened, then desperate. Where was Achilles? Where was their greatest champion when they needed him? But Achilles remained in his tent, nursing his anger, refusing to save his comrades. For days, Penthesilea dominated the battlefield. She killed more Greeks, pushed them back toward their ships, made them fear that Troy might actually prevail after 9 years of siege. The Trojans, emboldened, fought with renewed energy. Perhaps the war could be won. Perhaps Penthesilea was their salvation. But heroic tales follow patterns. The Amazon queen, no matter how skilled, existed in Greek mythology to be defeated. Her triumphs were setting for tragedy. Her power demonstrated only to prove that male heroes remained supreme. Achilles eventually emerged from his tent, drawn by the death of his beloved Patroclus, driven by grief and rage to rejoin the war. When Achilles returned to battle, he wore armor forged by the god Hephaestus himself. He fought with fury that transcended mortal limits. He killed Trojans by the dozen, by the 100, turning the tide yet again. And eventually, inevitably, he encountered Penthesilea. The duel between Achilles and Penthesilea became one of the most painted scenes in Greek art, one of the most retold episodes in Trojan War mythology, two great warriors meeting in single combat. Mortal man against Amazon queen, Greek civilization against the warrior women who challenged it. They fought with skill and determination on both sides. Penthesilea was fast, experienced, deadly. She had killed countless enemies in her years as queen. She had survived battles that would have slain lesser warriors. But Achilles was something beyond normal human capability. He had been dipped in the river Styx as an infant, making him invulnerable except for his heel. He had been trained by the centaur Chiron. He was, in every sense that mattered, built for killing. His spear found her, through armor, through flesh, through the body that had ridden thousands of miles across the steppe, had drawn countless bows, had lived freely in ways Greek women never could. Penthesilea fell from her horse. She hit the ground hard. The dust of Troy's plain rose around her fallen form. And then, in the most famous version of the story, the detail that made this episode truly tragic, Achilles removed her helmet. He looked at her face for the first time, and he fell in love. Penthesilea was beautiful, the stories say, even dying, even with blood on her lips and light fading from her eyes. She was the most beautiful woman Achilles had ever seen. He was struck by sudden grief, sudden desire, sudden recognition of what he had just destroyed. He had killed not a monster, not an enemy, but a woman who might have been his equal, his companion, his match. In the instant of her death, he wanted her alive, but desire came too late. Recognition came too late. She died in the dust. Her Amazon companions died defending her body, and Troy lost its brief hope of salvation. The Greeks celebrated. Achilles mourned in his own way, though whether he mourned the woman or merely the loss of a worthy opponent remains unclear. Thersites, that ugly Greek who always said what others thought but dared not speak, mocked Achilles for his grief, for his tears over a dead woman. Achilles killed him too, because heroes do not accept mockery, and because perhaps Thersites touched a truth Achilles could not bear to acknowledge. Penthesilea's story ends there, in the dust of Troy, loved too late by the man who killed her. It is tragedy in the purest sense. Two people who might have understood each other, might have valued each other, brought together only in the moment of destruction. It is the Amazon mythos, concentrated into one duel, the warrior woman proving her skill, threatening male dominance, and ultimately being destroyed by it, only to be mourned and desired once she was safely dead and could no longer pose real challenge. The Greeks never forgot Penthesilea. They painted her death on vases, carved it on temple friezes, wrote poems about that moment when Achilles looked into her dead face and felt his heart break. They needed her to die, but they also needed to grieve her death, to acknowledge that something valuable was lost, that killing Amazon queens came at cost. The ambivalence reveals everything about how Greeks viewed these warrior women. Threatening while alive, tragic in death, always more complex than simple enemies, always touching something deeper than ordinary warfare. A moment between warriors. The spear has done its work. Achilles stands above her, breathing hard, spear still in hand. Around them, battle continues. Men screaming and dying, metal clashing against metal, horses crying in fear and pain. But in this small space, in the dust where Penthesilea has fallen, everything becomes still. He knows he should move on. There are other enemies to kill, other Trojans to slaughter, other glory to claim. This is just another kill in a war filled with killing. He has slain dozens today, will slay dozens more before the sun sets. One more corpse in the dirt should mean nothing, but something makes him pause. Something makes him kneel beside the fallen Amazon. Something makes him reach for her helmet. His hands, still trembling with battle rage, fumble with the straps. The helmet is well made, bronze worked with skill, decorated with plumes now dragging in bloody dust. He removes it carefully, almost gently, revealing the face beneath. Time stops. She is young, younger than he expected, perhaps 25 summers. Though with warrior women, it is hard to tell. Hard-living and constant combat-age people, in ways that show more in body than face. But her face is untouched by scars. Beautiful, though that word feels inadequate. Strong features, high cheekbones, lips slightly parted as she struggles for breath. Her eyes, grey like storm clouds, look up at him with something that might be recognition, might be accusation, might be understanding. She is dying. He can see it in her eyes, in the pale colour spreading across her skin, in the blood pooling beneath her. His spear has pierced her chest, has found the heart or something close to it. No physician can save her. No god will intervene. She has perhaps minutes left, perhaps only seconds. He should feel triumph. This is what he does. This is who he is. Achilles, killer of heroes, breaker of armies, the warrior who will die young, but be remembered forever. He has just defeated an Amazon queen, has proven male supremacy over female challenge. Songs will be written about this moment. His name will grow even greater. This is victory. So why does his chest hurt? Why does he feel as if he has lost something, rather than won something? Why does he want to take the spear back, to unsay the last 30 seconds, to have this woman alive and fighting him still rather than dying in the dust? Her lips move. She is trying to speak. He leans closer. This man who minutes ago wanted nothing but her death, now desperate to hear her final words. Worthy, she whispers. The word emerges with blood. You are worthy. Not hatred, not curse, not the dying condemnation he might have expected. Instead, respect, acknowledgement that he is, truly, the greatest warrior alive. She, who has fought for years, who has killed countless men, who has led armies and won victories, grants him this recognition with her last breath. It is gift. It is forgiveness. It is something he does not deserve. I would have liked, she continues, each word an effort, to know you. Not like this. As equals, as warriors, as friends. Her eyes hold his. In them, he sees possibility. An alternate world where they met differently, where they trained together, fought together, tested each other without lethal stakes, where a woman could be warrior and a man could see her as warrior rather than woman first, where the rigid boundaries of civilization did not require one of them to die. I'm sorry, he says, and means it, though he cannot quite say what he is sorry for. Sorry for killing her? That was his job, his nature, his destiny. Sorry that she lived in a world where women who fought were punished for it. That is not his fault. Sorry that he never knew her alive, never talked with her, never learned her stories. That feels closer to truth. She smiles. It is small, sad, but genuine. Good, she breathes. Better to die to one who regrets it than one who rejoices. Her eyes fix on something above him, something he cannot see. Her body relaxes. The tension of dying leaves her. She becomes still, silent, gone. Achilles continues kneeling there long after her spirit has fled. His hand, without conscious thought, closes her eyes. He straightens her limbs, positions her with dignity. When her Amazon companions lie nearby, also dead, he arranges their bodies respectfully. These are not actions of a conqueror. These are actions of a mourner. Someone approaches. Thersites, that ugly Greek with his bitter tongue, always ready with mockery. Weeping for a dead woman? He sneers. Did the great Achilles fall in love? With a corpse? Should we drag her to your tent so you can enjoy your prize? The words are acid. They are deliberately cruel. They take the moment, the strange grief Achilles feels, and make it obscene. They transform respect into necrophilia, sorrow into perversion. They deny that a warrior could mourn another warrior, regardless of sex. Achilles stands, turns. His fist catches Thersites in the temple. The ugly Greek falls. He does not get up. He will not get up ever again. His skull is crushed. He is dead before his body fully collapses. The other Greeks watching this exchange back away. Achilles has just killed one of their own for insulting him. But no one protests. No one demands justice for Thersites. His death seems appropriate somehow. Punishment for crossing a line, for mocking something that should not be mocked. Achilles looks down at Penthesilea one last time. Her face in death is peaceful. He thinks about alternate worlds, about might-have-beens, about the waste inherent in war. Then he turns away, returns to battle, continues killing. Because that is what he does. That is all he can do. The moment of recognition, of grief, of possibility changes nothing about his path. He will fight, he will kill, he will die young at Troy, and he will remember, until his death, the grey eyes of the Amazon queen who called him worthy with her dying breath. Later, much later, men will paint this scene on vases. They will sculpt it in marble. They will write poems about it. They will call it the moment Achilles' heart broke. They will make it romance, will suggest he loved her from first sight. But that is simplification. What Achilles felt was more complex than love. It was recognition, the sudden understanding that he had just killed someone who was, in all the ways that mattered, like him, a warrior, a killer, a person shaped by violence into something magnificent and terrible. He had found his mirror in an Amazon queen, and he had shattered that mirror with his spear before he understood what he was seeing. That is the real tragedy. Not that he loved her, but that he might have understood her if she had lived. An understanding between people taught to see each other as enemies, as gendered opposites, as impossible to each other, is rarer and more precious than love. It died with Penthesilea in the dust of Troy, and the world was poorer for its loss, the conqueror's dream. In the spring of 330 BC, Alexander stood on the edge of greatness. He had already conquered most of the known world. He had defeated the Persian Empire, claimed Egypt, pushed his army to the edges of India. He was 27 years old and had achieved what no king before him had dreamed possible. He was also, despite his victories, troubled by questions of mortality, legacy, divine favour. He had been taught by Aristotle to question everything. Now he questioned whether conquest was enough. His army rested in Hyrcania, near the Caspian Sea, recovering from recent campaigns. The soldiers deserved rest, and Alexander needed time to plan his next move. East beckoned, always east, toward lands even more distant and strange. But gossip ran through the camp, a story too strange to be strategy, too specific to be complete invention. A queen had arrived requesting audience with Alexander. An Amazon queen, her name was Thalestris, and she ruled a nation of warrior women somewhere to the north. She had travelled for weeks, with 300 female warriors as escort. She sought to meet the conqueror, to see for herself this man who had brought down empires. The stories disagree about what happened next. Some sources claim it never occurred at all, that Alexander's more sober historians never mentioned it, that later writers invented the entire episode to add exotic flavour to the conqueror's legend. Others insist it was real, was documented, was one of those strange historical moments when myth and reality briefly touched. According to those who believed it happened, Thalestris arrived at Alexander's camp in late spring. She dismounted from her horse, a tall woman dressed in leather and bronze, carrying weapons, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. She approached Alexander without fear, without the deference most rulers showed the conqueror. She looked him in the eyes as an equal. Through interpreters, she made her request. She had come to breed with him. She wanted a child, and she wanted that child to be sired by the greatest warrior in the world. It was a practical request, transactional, devoid of romance. She would stay with him until conception occurred, then return to her people. If the child was female, she would keep and raise it as an Amazon. If male, she would send it to Alexander for him to raise as he saw fit. The sheer boldness of this request must have shocked the Macedonians listening. Women did not propose breeding arrangements. Women did not travel with armies. Women did not negotiate with kings as if they were themselves kings. The entire situation violated Greek understanding of proper gender relations. And yet, here was this woman, this queen, making demands as if she had every right to do so. Alexander, according to the story, agreed. Perhaps he was curious. Perhaps he was attracted to her strength, her directness, her complete confidence. Perhaps he saw political advantage in alliance with these northern peoples. Or perhaps, like any young man confronted with a beautiful woman, offering herself without conditions, he simply said yes. For 13 days, the accounts claim, Alexander and Thalestris were inseparable. What they discussed in private, what they did beyond the obvious, remains unknown. But when the 13 days concluded, Thalestris departed. She rode north with her 300 warriors, back toward her homeland, back toward the steppe. History loses track of her after that. No source confirms whether she bore Alexander's child. No record exists of an Amazon princess or prince appearing in later years to claim descent from the conqueror. Most modern historians dismiss the entire episode as fiction. Alexander's primary historians, Ptolemy and Aristobulus, never mentioned it. The story appears only in later, less reliable sources. It has all the marks of legend: the exotic queen, the sexual encounter, the number 13 which holds symbolic weight. It feels like the kind of tale soldiers tell around campfires that grows more dramatic with each retelling. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere between happened and invented. Perhaps Alexander did encounter Scythian or Sarmatian delegations in Hyrcania. Perhaps there were women among those delegations. Because as we now know, women sometimes held positions in steppe societies. Perhaps there was negotiation, alliance building, mutual curiosity between Greek conqueror and nomadic peoples. And perhaps, in the retelling, in the myth-making that always surrounded Alexander, this mundane diplomatic encounter transformed into romantic legend, into the story of the Amazon queen and the world conqueror. What matters is not whether Thalestris existed. What matters is that Greeks found the story plausible enough to tell, to record, to debate. Even in Alexander's era, centuries after Homer, generations after the Trojan War, the Amazon retained narrative power. The warrior woman, arriving to confront the greatest male warrior, still captured imagination, still seemed possible enough to believe, still touched something deep in Greek consciousness. If the story is true, it represents the Amazon at her most empowered. Not victim, not defeated enemy, but free agent choosing her own destiny, using the greatest conqueror alive for her purposes, rather than being used by him. Thalestris, in this telling, gets what she wants and leaves, returning to her kingdom, refusing to be absorbed into Greek civilization or male control. If the story is false, it represents Greek anxiety dressed as legend. Even Alexander, even the man who conquered the world, even he must encounter and be challenged by the Amazon. The warrior woman exists at every era, in every generation, eternally testing whether male dominance is real or merely maintained by force and convention. Either way, true or invented, the story of Alexander and Thalestris demonstrates that the Amazon had become a permanent fixture in Greek imagination. She adapted to each era, appeared in each age, forced each generation of Greek men to ask uncomfortable questions about gender, power, and the natural order. She could not be defeated finally because she was not merely enemy or person. She was idea, and ideas, unlike women, cannot be killed. Reflections in bronze. Walk through any major museum with a Greek collection, and you will see her. On vases, black figure and red figure, her form repeated in countless variations. In temple friezes, carved in marble, her battles decorating sacred spaces. In bronze statuettes, small enough to hold, large enough to display her distinctive costume and weapons. The Amazon, forever frozen in art, becomes the most frequently depicted woman in Greek visual culture after Athena herself. Look closely at these images, and patterns emerge. The Amazon is always beautiful. Even in defeat, even dying, she retains feminine attractiveness. Her face, regardless of context, shows delicate features. Her body, despite armor, reveals curves. Greek artists could not imagine a warrior woman without also making her desirable. Beauty and violence combine, creating a figure both threatening and alluring. She wears exotic costume, different from Greek women's clothing, trousers, which Greeks found simultaneously ridiculous and fascinating, patterned tunics that suggest Eastern influence, pointed caps, boots designed for riding. Her hair is often short or bound, practical for combat, but also marking her as different from respectable Greek women who wore their hair long. She is foreign, barbarian, other, but she is never ugly. Otherness makes her interesting rather than repulsive. Her weapons vary by period and artist. Early depictions favour bows and arrows, emphasising her connection to Artemis, to hunting, to distance killing. Later images add spears, axes, shields. The double-headed axe becomes particularly associated with Amazons, this weapon that requires strength to wield effectively. She carries tools of war as naturally as Greek men, proving through artistic representation that female warriors are conceivable even if uncomfortable. The scenes depicted follow predictable patterns. Amazonomachy, the battle between Greeks and Amazons, dominates. Temple friezes show extended combats, warriors on both sides fighting, killing, dying. The Parthenon in Athens featured Amazon battles prominently. These warrior women literally carved into the temple that celebrated Athenian power and Athena's protection. The message was clear. We defeated them, we beat back the female threat, we restored proper order. But look more carefully at those battle scenes. The Amazons are not weak, they fight with skill. Wound Greek warriors sometimes gain the upper hand in individual duels. Artists depict them as worthy opponents rather than easy victims. A Greek victory over a contemptible enemy brings little glory. A Greek victory over dangerous, skilled, fearsome Amazons proves masculine superiority, validates patriarchal social order through demonstration that even warrior women ultimately lose to male warriors. Death scenes proliferate. Amazons falling, wounded, expiring dramatically with hand to forehead or breast, but their deaths are beautiful, artistic, composed. They do not die in the ugly, realistic ways soldiers actually die. They die like dancers, like performers, maintaining feminine grace even in extremis. Their blood does not spatter, their bodies do not contort. They become aesthetic objects. Violence transformed into art. Female death made palatable through beauty. Some vases show capture rather than killing. Greek warriors seizing Amazons, presumably to enslave them or take them as prizes. These images carry obvious sexual undertones. The warrior woman subdued, brought under male control, forced into submission, the fantasy of conquering the unconquerable, of dominating the woman who refused domination. These are not innocent artistic choices. They reveal desires, anxieties, the eroticization of female strength, once that strength is safely defeated. A few rare images show Amazons victorious. These are less common, perhaps because Greek patrons did not enjoy displaying Greek defeats. But they exist, providing visual evidence that artists could imagine Amazon success, could depict Greek warriors falling to female weapons. Even these images, though, typically appear in contexts where overall Greek victory is assured. The Amazon might win one duel, but still loses the war. She can be dangerous, but not ultimately triumphant. What these artistic representations reveal is Greek obsession. The Amazon appears everywhere, in every medium, across centuries. If these warrior women were merely exotic curiosity, merely rare barbarians from distant lands, they would not dominate Greek art so completely. But they mattered, they troubled, they required constant engagement, constant processing through visual representation. Artists made Amazons because patrons wanted Amazons. Wealthy Greeks commissioning pottery or sculpture chose Amazon scenes again and again. Why? Perhaps because these images allowed them to confront their fears in controlled contexts. The Amazon threatens but ultimately loses. She demonstrates female capacity for violence, but proves that capacity is insufficient against male warriors. She validates Greek gender roles by showing what happens when women step outside those roles. Death, defeat, capture, subjugation. Or perhaps the appeal was simpler. Perhaps Greek men found warrior women exciting, sexually stimulating, worthy of depiction, because they combined danger with desire in ways that Greek wives and daughters, safely domestic and submissive, could not provide. The Amazon offered fantasy of the strong woman who could still be conquered, the independent woman who could still be possessed, the martial woman who remained feminine and beautiful. She was everything Greek culture taught women could not be, depicted endlessly as proof that even impossibility could be imagined, carved, painted, owned. The art survives. Museums preserve it. Scholars study it. Modern viewers look at these ancient images of warrior women and read them through contemporary lenses, seeing different meanings than Greeks saw, but the obsession remains visible. The repetition testifies to power. The Amazon, in bronze and marble and painted clay, proves that some ideas cannot be suppressed, cannot be dismissed, cannot be forgotten no matter how firmly. Civilization insists they represent impossible deviations from natural order. She fights forever in Greek art. She dies forever. She threatens forever. And Greek men look at her forever, seeing both fear and desire, both warning and wish, both what must never be and what might always be, just beyond civilization's edge, waiting in the unknown spaces of the world. The steppe transformed. Time changes everything, even the vast spaces where change seems impossible. The Eurasian steppe, that endless grassland where the Amazons of reality once rode, did not remain frozen in the 4th or 3rd centuries BC. History moved across it like weather, altering landscapes, human and physical, transforming the cultures that had made room for warrior women into something different, something that no longer needed or valued female fighters in quite the same way. The changes came gradually, over generations, driven by forces both external and internal. From the east, new peoples migrated westward, pushed by pressures we can only partially reconstruct. The Xiongnu, those fierce nomads, who would eventually be called Huns, began their centuries-long movement across the steppe sometime in the 3rd century BC. They displaced other tribes, created cascading waves of migration, forced Scythian and Sarmatian peoples to move, to adapt, to fight wars of survival rather than raids of glory. The Scythians, who had dominated the western steppe for centuries, began to fade from historical record. Some were absorbed by new arrivals. Others migrated south and west, settling in Crimea, along the Black Sea coast, in regions where Greek cities could be found. Settlement changed them. Agriculture replaced pastoralism for some groups. Fixed homes replaced felt tents. The horse became less central. And with these changes, the military culture that had enabled female warriors began to erode. When you settle, when you build permanent homes and plough fields, social organisation shifts. Agricultural labour rewards upper body strength in ways that herding does not. The economic contribution of women relative to men decreases, so warfare changes too, becomes less about mobility and archery, more about defending fixed positions, holding territory, organising infantry. The particular combination of factors that made steppe women into warriors, that created the reality behind Amazon myths, began to dissolve. The Sarmatians lasted longer. They maintained nomadic lifestyle into the early centuries AD, continuing to roam the steppe, continuing their warrior culture. But they too changed. Contact with Rome brought new military technologies, new tactics, new pressures. The Sarmatians became famous for heavy cavalry, warriors in scale armour, riding armoured horses, charging with lances rather than circling with bows. This style of warfare favoured male upper body strength more than traditional steppe tactics. Women could still ride, still fight in theory, but the military niche they had occupied narrowed. Greek and Roman observers, in the late ancient period, still occasionally mentioned Sarmatian warrior women, but the references grew rarer, more doubtful, increasingly treated as exotic curiosities rather than normal features of these peoples. Ammianus Marcellinus, writing in the 4th century AD, mentioned that Sarmatian women sometimes fought, but he presented it as unusual custom rather than common practice. The shift in tone from earlier accounts is telling. What Herodotus had described matter-of-factly in the 5th century BC had become by the 4th century AD barely believable oddity. Religious changes played a role as well. Christianity spread across the steppe's edges, bringing with it very definite ideas about gender roles, about proper feminine behaviour, about the sinfulness of women who stepped outside divinely ordained boundaries. When Sarmatian and Alan tribes began converting, when Christian missionaries arrived with their message of salvation and submission, the old acceptance of female warriors became problematic. A Christian woman should be modest, domestic, obedient. She should not kill. The Bible offered no examples of holy warrior women, no saints who rode to battle. Christian Sarmatians gradually, reluctantly, began conforming to new expectations. The great migrations of the 4th and 5th centuries AD finished what earlier changes had begun. The Huns arrived, devastating remaining Scythian and Sarmatian tribes, pushing them west into collision with Rome, scattering them across Europe. The Goths, fleeing the Huns, carved through Sarmatian territory. The Alans, descendants of Sarmatians, split into multiple groups, some serving as Roman military allies, others joining the great Gothic and Vandal migrations that would eventually sack Rome itself. In all this chaos, in all this movement and violence and cultural disruption, old traditions died. The Alans, who served Rome, adopted Roman military structure. The Sarmatians, who settled in Hungary or Gaul or Spain, gradually merged with local populations, abandoned their language, forgot their steppe origins. The warrior women, if they still existed, left no record. No burials from this later period show the clear pattern of armed females that earlier kurgans demonstrated. The practice, if not entirely dead, had become rare enough to escape historical notice. By the 6th century AD, the reality of steppe warrior women had effectively ended. The cultures that created them had transformed beyond recognition or disappeared entirely. The Scythians were gone, remembered only in histories and in gold treasures, occasionally unearthed from ancient graves. The Sarmatians persisted in name but not in substance. their descendants scattered across Europe, their identity diluted, their customs forgotten. The vast steppe they had dominated now belonged to Turkic peoples, to Avars and Bulgars and Khazars, tribes with their own customs, their own gender roles, their own ways of organizing society. The conditions that made warrior women possible, that brief window of several centuries, when nomadic steppe culture allowed, and sometimes encouraged female fighters, had closed. Women still lived on the steppe, of course. Women still rode horses, still managed herds, still performed essential labor, but the accepted role of woman as warrior, of female fighter buried with weapons and honor, had faded into the past, becoming memory, then legend, then myth indistinguishable from the Greek tales of Amazon cities and warrior queens. The real Amazons died quietly, not in glorious last stands, but in cultural transformation, in the slow grinding of historical change that turns peoples into different peoples, that makes old ways obsolete, that erases even the memory of what once was possible. They died as traditions die, as languages die, as entire ways of being human can die when the world changes enough. They left behind only bones in burial mounds, gold treasures in museums, and Greek stories that remembered them wrong, but at least remembered them at all. From warriors to symbols. As the flesh and blood warrior women of the steppe faded into history, the Greek and Roman concept of the Amazon transformed from report of foreign peoples into pure symbol, into philosophical concept, into artistic motif, divorced from any connection to reality. The Amazon became whatever thinkers and artists needed her to be, her meaning shifting with each generation, each culture, each new set of anxieties about gender and power. In classical Greek philosophy, particularly in the works of Plato and his students, the Amazon served as thought experiments. If women could be warriors, Plato asked in his Republic, should they be educated as warriors? He imagined a city where female guardians trained alongside males, where the best women fought to defend the state, just as the best men did. This was radical thinking, suggesting that gender roles might be conventional rather than natural. But Plato was careful to maintain that women were generally weaker, less capable, useful for such roles only exceptionally. The Amazon remained exception, proof that women could fight but not that they should. Later Greek philosophers were more conservative. Aristotle, Plato's student, rejected female guardians entirely. Women, he argued, were naturally inferior to men in reason and strength. The few examples of warrior women, the Amazons and Sarmatians that historians reported, were aberrations, violations of natural law, evidence of barbarian corruption, rather than alternative possibilities. A properly ordered society, Aristotle insisted, kept women in their appropriate subordinate place. The Amazon, in his philosophy, became warning rather than possibility. Roman writers inherited Greek Amazon obsession, but adapted it to their own needs. For Romans, the Amazon represented barbarian femininity, the kind of gender disorder that threatened civilization. Roman historians writing about their enemies, particularly Germanic and Celtic tribes, sometimes claimed those peoples allowed women to fight. This was presented as evidence of barbarism, as proof that these peoples needed Roman conquest and civilization. The Amazon became a rhetorical weapon, shorthand for saying, these people are so savage that even their women are warriors. But Romans also admired the Amazon in certain contexts. Virgil's Aeneid included Camilla, an Italian warrior maiden who fought against Aeneas and his Trojans. She was clearly modelled on Amazons, riding into battle, killing Trojan warriors, displaying martial prowess that rivaled male heroes. Virgil treated her with respect, made her death tragic, suggested that female warriors could embody virtue and honour even if they ultimately had to die to make room for male dominance and Roman order. In Roman art, Amazons proliferated even more than in Greek art. Amazon battles decorated triumphal arches, commemorated military victories, symbolized Rome's power over foreign and chaotic forces. The defeated Amazon, on her knees or falling backward, appeared in sculpture after sculpture. She represented everything Rome conquered: the foreign, the barbarian, the female, the chaotic. Her defeat proved Roman superiority on multiple levels simultaneously. Early Christian writers found the Amazon useful for different purposes. Church fathers condemned warrior women as evidence of pagan corruption, as demonstration of how far humanity had fallen before Christ's redemption. Women who fought violated biblical teaching about female submission, about the curse of Eve, about proper feminine roles. The Amazon became another pagan sin to be rejected along with idolatry and immorality. But other Christian writers were more nuanced. Jerome, translating the Bible and writing commentaries in the 4th and early 5th centuries AD, mentioned Amazons occasionally as historical peoples, neither condemning nor praising them particularly. Augustine wrestled with the question of whether warrior women could exist in a world created by God. His conclusion was that God permitted aberrations to demonstrate the variety of creation, but that did not make aberrations normal or good. The Amazon could exist, in other words, but should not be imitated. Medieval writers inherited these contradictory traditions and added their own interpretations. In Romance literature, Amazon queens appeared as exotic challenges for knights. They ruled distant kingdoms, tested male heroes, eventually yielded to Christian warriors who defeated them in combat or converted them through love. The pattern was consistent. The warrior woman must be overcome, must be brought under male authority, must learn proper feminine submission. But medieval writers also created female warrior saints, blending Amazon imagery with Christian devotion. Joan of Arc, though she lived in the 15th century, had literary precedence in stories of maiden warriors who fought for God, who took up arms for righteous causes, who combined feminine virtue with martial courage. These warrior saints were acceptable because they fought for Christianity, because their violence served divine purpose, because they remained virgins and thus did not fully embrace female sexuality alongside their martial roles. In art and literature, the Amazon became increasingly generic. Artists depicted Amazon battles without understanding or caring about Scythian culture, about steppe peoples, about the historical reality that inspired the myths. The Amazon wore whatever costume seemed exotic, fought with whatever weapons looked dramatic, represented whatever fears or fantasies the artist wanted to explore. She lost connection to the burial mounds on the Eurasian steppe, to the real women who had inspired Greek travellers to tell impossible tales. Heraldry adopted Amazon imagery. Noble families used Amazon figures on coats of arms, symbolizing martial valor without masculine aggression. Queens and powerful women sometimes compared themselves to Amazons, claiming that heritage as justification for their authority. Elizabeth I of England was called an Amazon by her supporters. The comparison meant as compliment, suggesting she combined feminine grace with masculine strength and courage. By the Renaissance, the Amazon had become so divorced from historical origin that artists could depict her in whatever way served their purposes. She might wear classical Greek armor or medieval plate. She might carry ancient weapons or contemporary firearms. She might live in Africa or Asia or America. The Amazon was everywhere and nowhere, symbols so flexible she could mean almost anything. What disappeared in all this symbolic elaboration was the truth. The real warrior women of the steppe, the Scythian and Sarmatian females, buried with bows and arrows, the historical basis for the Greek myths, vanished from cultural memory. They became invisible beneath layers of interpretation, beneath centuries of artistic representation, beneath the accumulated weight of every meaning, every culture had projected onto the Amazon concept. The warrior woman became art, became literature, became symbol, became philosophy, became warning, became inspiration, became whatever viewers and readers needed her to be. But she stopped being a person, stopped being a culture, stopped being connected to the specific historical circumstances that made some women warriors possible on the ancient steppe. She became immortal precisely by ceasing to be real. The symbol survived because the reality had died. Whispers in the East. Even after the Scythians and Sarmatians faded, even after the specific cultures that enabled warrior women dissolved into history, rumours persisted. Travellers returning from distant lands brought tales of women who fought, of peoples where gender roles differed from Mediterranean norms. The Amazon, having lost her historical anchor, floated freely across the medieval and early modern imagination, appearing wherever men encountered women who seemed too strong, too independent, too martial. Arab geographers of the medieval period, those scholars who mapped trade routes and documented foreign peoples, sometimes mentioned Amazon-like groups. Al-Masudi, writing in the 10th century AD, described an island in the Indian Ocean, where women ruled and men were kept as subordinates. Ibn Fadlan, travelling among the Volga Bulgars and Rus in the 920s AD, reported customs that shocked him, including women who had more freedom than Islamic law permitted. Were these Amazons? Not in any classical sense. But the comparison arose naturally when Muslim travellers encountered gender arrangements different from their own. European travellers to Asia brought back similar tales. Marco Polo, that Venetian merchant who claimed to have reached China in the 13th century, wrote of an island near Java where only women lived. He described them as ruling themselves, bearing arms, defending their territory. Whether Polo actually visited this place, or simply repeated sailors' stories, is questionable. But the persistence of the theme is notable. Wherever travellers went, they found or imagined societies where women held unusual power, where female independence challenged patriarchal assumptions. The Caucasus Mountains, that range between the Black Sea and the Caspian, became a particular focus of Amazon rumours. This region was remote from major civilizations, home to dozens of small ethnic groups with their own languages and customs. Travellers passing through brought back stories of warrior women in mountain valleys, of tribes where females fought alongside males. Some of these rumours may have had basis in local practices. Mountain peoples often developed egalitarian customs out of necessity, everyone contributing to defence when terrain and isolation made survival precarious. But as usual, reality was exaggerated into myth, local custom transformed into Amazon legend. Russian expansion into the Caucasus and Central Asia in the 18th and 19th centuries generated new reports of warrior women. Cossack soldiers and Orthodox missionaries encountered peoples whose gender customs seemed strange. Circassian women reportedly rode horses and knew how to fight. Chechen and Dagestani cultures supposedly allowed women more freedom than Russian Christianity deemed proper. These observations were filtered through Russian prejudices, through Orthodox assumptions about proper femininity, through imperialist desire to portray conquered peoples as barbarous and in need of civilization. But underneath the bias, perhaps some truth remained. Mountain and steppe cultures had not entirely forgotten older patterns, older possibilities for women's roles. The Americas provided new locations for Amazon legends after 1492 AD. Spanish conquistadors, pushing into South America, heard indigenous stories about warrior women living along a great river. They called this river the Amazon, a name it bears to this day. Francisco de Orellana, exploring in 1542 AD, claimed his expedition fought female warriors, described them as tall and pale-skinned, said they used bows with deadly accuracy. Were these real indigenous women defending their territory? Or were these Spanish fantasies projected onto unfamiliar peoples? Probably the latter, though some indigenous American cultures did have warrior women traditions. The Spanish, encountering something they had not expected, reached for the nearest myth their culture provided. the Amazon. In Africa, European explorers and colonizers found or invented warrior women everywhere. The Dahomey Kingdom, in what is now Benin, had actual female military units, the Agoji, who fought in wars and protected the king. But European accounts exaggerated and sexualized these warriors, compared them to Amazons, described them in terms that owed more to Greek mythology than African reality. The Dahomey women warriors were real, effective soldiers who participated in significant military campaigns into the 19th century, but they were transformed in European writing into exotic Amazon fantasies. What all these reports share is a pattern. Men from patriarchal cultures encountering evidence that gender roles are not universal, that different societies organize male and female relations differently, that women, in some contexts, can be warriors or leaders or autonomous beings. Unable to process this reality within their own cultural frameworks, these observers reached for the Amazon myth. They saw what they expected to see, described foreign women through the lens of ancient Greek stories, transformed reality into legend. The whispers from the East, from the Americas, from Africa, from anywhere distant and strange, kept the Amazon alive in European consciousness long after the Scythians had disappeared, long after any historical basis for the myths had been forgotten. The warrior woman became a ghost, haunting the edges of the known world, appearing wherever exploration pushed boundaries, wherever men encountered women who refused to be what patriarchy expected. But these whispers, these rumors, these travelers' tales contributed to the Amazon's transformation into pure symbol, disconnected from any specific historical people, from any particular culture. The Amazon became universal feminine threat, eternal possibility, permanent challenge to patriarchal order. She existed everywhere and nowhere. She was real and unreal simultaneously. She was whatever gender anxiety required her to be. In coffee houses and salons, in geographic societies and university lectures, learned men debated whether Amazons had ever truly existed. Some said yes, citing Herodotus and archaeological finds of weapons in graves. Others said no, insisting warrior women violated natural law, claiming ancient historians were merely reporting myths as facts. The debate continued for centuries, unresolved, perhaps unresolvable. What none of these debaters understood was that the Amazon was both real and myth simultaneously. Real warrior women had existed on the ancient steppe, had inspired Greek stories, had left their bones and bronze arrowheads buried in kurgans. But those women were not Amazons in the Greek sense, and the Amazons of Greek legend were not those real women. The two existed in different registers of reality, connected but separate, neither fully true nor entirely false. The whispers from the East kept both alive. The historical memory and the mythological transformation blurred together into a single tradition that could not be killed because it was already half dead, could not be proven false because it was partly true. The last Sarmatian. She is 63 years old, an age nearly impossible to reach on the steppe, and she knows she is dying. Not from battle wounds, though she has plenty of those, scars mapping her arms and torso like faded tattoos. Not from violence, though violence has defined her existence. She is dying from age itself, from time's patient erosion, from the simple wearing out of a body that has ridden too far, fought too hard, survived too much. Her name is Tirgatau, like the war leader from generations ago, like the queen who fought Romans in distant times. Names repeat on the steppe. Children are named for heroes, hoping the name carries strength into new lives. She has tried to live up to her name. She has tried to be worthy of the woman whose deeds were sung when she was young. She sits outside her tent, in autumn sunshine. Around her, the camp prepares for winter migration. Families pack belongings onto wagons. Herders gather horses and sheep. Children run and play, not understanding yet how hard life becomes when the cold arrives. Everything is routine, familiar, the eternal rhythm of nomadic existence that her people have followed for longer than anyone can remember. But things are different now. Tirgatau can see it, feel it, knows it with the certainty that comes from having lived too long. Her people are changing. They are settling more, moving less. They trade with Greek cities on the Black Sea coast, with Roman outposts to the west, with Parthians to the east. They adopt foreign customs, foreign technologies, foreign ideas, including foreign ideas about women. Her granddaughter approaches, a girl of 14 summers, already beautiful, already promised in marriage to a young warrior from an allied tribe. The girl sits beside Tirgatau, curls against her grandmother's side. They sit in comfortable silence, watching the camp's activity, feeling the sun's warmth while it lasts. "Grandmother," the girl says eventually, "tell me again about when you killed the Alan chief." Tirgatau smiles. She has told this story many times. It happened in her 20th summer, a battle over grazing rights that escalated into full tribal warfare. The Alan chief had led a raid on Tirgatau's tribe, had killed her brother, had taken horses and captives. Tirgatau tracked him for 3 days, finally catching him at dawn when he thought himself safe. Her arrow took him in the throat. She still remembers his look of surprise, of disbelief that a woman had hunted him so effectively. "I was younger than you are now when I learned to shoot," Tirgatau says softly. "Your age. My mother taught me. She said every member of the tribe must be useful, must be able to defend what is ours. She gave me a bow and taught me how to use it. Will you teach me?" the girl asks. Tirgatau's smile fades. This is the question she has been avoiding, the question that makes her acknowledge how much has changed. "Your father would not permit it," she says. "Times are different. The tribes are different. We live near Romans now, trade with Greeks. They have ideas about women, about what is proper. Your father has absorbed those ideas. He says, you should learn weaving, cooking, household management. He says, fighting is for men." The girl is quiet for a moment. Then, "But you fought." "I did. I killed 7 men in my life. I went on 17 raids. I earned my armor, my weapons, my horse. I earned respect." Tirgatau pauses, choosing words carefully. "But I was also different. There were not many women warriors even in my youth. Perhaps 1 in 5 or 6 of our fighters were female. The rest were men. I was unusual, exceptional. I trained harder than the boys because I had to prove I belonged. I survived battles that killed stronger warriors because I was lucky and careful and good." "I could be good too," the girl says. "You could? You have strong hands, good eyes. You would make a fine archer." Tirgatau takes a breath. "This is hard to say, hard to acknowledge. But you will not. Because the world is changing. Because our people want peace and trade more than they want war. Because men from settled peoples, Greeks and Romans and Parthians, look at us and say, our women are too free, too wild, too much like men. And our men, wanting to be respected by these outsiders, are making our women more like their women. Quiet, domestic, obedient." The girl pulls away, anger flashing across her young face. "That is not fair." "No," Tirgatau agrees. "It is not fair, but fair is a luxury that nomads cannot afford. We adapt or we die. Right now, our tribes are adapting to a world where warrior women are not acceptable to our neighbours, our trading partners, our potential allies. So warrior women disappear." "Will I be the last to know about you?" the girl asks. "Will my children forget that women like you existed?" This question cuts deeper than any blade Tirgatau has faced in battle, because she fears the answer is yes. Her own daughter does not ride to war, has chosen different paths. Her sons respect her, but see her as relic, as reminder of older, stranger times. The young warriors in the tribe know she was a fighter, but they treat it as oddity, as exception so unusual it proves the rule that women should not fight. When she dies, and it will be soon, perhaps this winter, when cold settles deep and old bodies fail, there will be no warrior burial for her. Not because her tribe does not honor her, but because the customs are changing. Christian priests visit the camp now, speaking of new gods, new rules. Her son has been listening to them, considering conversion. Christians do not bury women with weapons. Christians say female warriors are sinful, unnatural, against divine law. Remember me, Tirgatau says quietly. That is all I ask. When I am gone, when you have children of your own, tell them about your grandmother who rode to war. Tell them that once before the world changed, some women were warriors. Tell them we were real. The girl nods, tears in her eyes. They sit together as the sun moves across the sky, as the camp continues its preparations, as the old world gives way to the new, as slowly and inevitably, as seasons change, as ice melts, as all things pass in their time. Tirgatau looks at her hands. They are weathered, scarred, twisted slightly by old breaks that never healed quite straight. They are the hands of a warrior who lived when such hands were possible on a woman's body. When she is gone, when the last women like her are gone, these hands will become impossible again. They will be remembered, perhaps, in stories that great-granddaughters only half believe. They will be painted on Greek vases and carved in marble friezes, transformed into myth, into Amazon legend. But they were real. She was real. And for a brief moment in history, measured in mere centuries against the vast span of human time, women could be warriors on the Eurasian steppe. It was not the world that stories said, not cities of women ruling over men. It was simply a world where some women learned to fight, were accepted as fighters, were buried with honor when they fell. That world is ending. Tirgatau can feel it ending, can watch it fade with each passing season. She does not regret living it. She only regrets that it was so brief, that it will be forgotten, that her granddaughter will never know the freedom of riding into battle, with bow in hand and wind in hair, and nothing between earth and sky, but the endless steppe rolling, away forever. Into the realm of story, there comes a moment, hard to identify precisely, when history transforms into legend, when memory becomes myth, when the thing that happened fades into the story about the thing that happened, and the story becomes more real than the reality it supposedly preserved. The warrior women of the steppe reached that moment somewhere in the gathering darkness of late antiquity. They were real, were documented, were buried with their weapons in graves that would survive millennia. But the cultures that produced them changed, dissolved, migrated, transformed into other cultures with other customs. The women who fought became grandmothers who told stories. The grandmothers died. The stories remained, passing from mouth to mouth, changing slightly with each retelling, losing detail, gaining embellishment, becoming polished by repetition into something almost too perfect to be true. And on the other side of the cultural divide, in Greece and Rome, the Amazon had always been more story than history. The Greeks had encountered warrior women, had been told about them, had perhaps seen them from a distance. But the Greeks had not understood, had filtered observation through their own assumptions, had transformed what they saw into what they expected, into what their culture could process. The Amazon became myth before she ever fully existed as fact. So from both directions, history walked into story, reality disappeared into legend, fact became fiction, became belief, became tradition, became myth. The warrior woman became the Amazon, became the symbol, became the archetype, became the eternal feminine threat that every patriarchal culture must confront, defeat, contain. Stories do what stories do. They simplify, clarify, exaggerate, dramatize. They remove ambiguity. Real Scythian women warriors were exceptions. Minorities within their tribes, women who chose or were chosen for martial roles while most women did other work. But stories turned them into a nation of warriors, all female, no exceptions, no complexity. Real encounters between Greeks and Scythians were probably brief, fragmentary, filtered through interpreters and cultural misunderstanding. But stories turn them into epic duels. Heroes versus queens, civilization versus barbarism. The truth was complicated. The myths were simple. And humanity, given a choice between complicated truth and simple myth, chooses myth every time. Myth is easier to remember, easier to tell, easier to use for moral lessons and cultural reinforcement. Myth serves purposes that truth cannot serve. So the Amazon settled into the realm of story. She took her place in the grand narrative. Humans tell themselves about gender and power, about civilization and barbarism, about order and chaos. She became permanent, immortal, unchanging. Real women warriors had lived and died. The Amazon would live forever, because she was story, and stories don't die as long as people keep telling them. Century after century, she waited in that realm where stories wait between tellings. She appeared when needed, when a culture wanted to discuss gender, wanted to explore what women might become if released from constraint, wanted to punish female ambition by showing its inevitable defeat. She served poets and painters, philosophers and priests. She was villain and victim, warning and inspiration, fear and fantasy. The steppe where she originated grew quiet. The burial mounds remained, grass-covered hills, holding the bones of women who rode to war. But no one remembered what those mounds contained. No one connected the graves to the myths. The stories floated free of their origins, untethered, drifting, available for whatever use each new generation required. And perhaps this was her final victory, her strange immortality. The warrior women who inspired the Amazon myths died. Their cultures died. Their languages died. Their stories died. Everything that made them specifically themselves, particularly real, was lost to time and change, and the remorseless erosion of the centuries. But the Amazon lived on. The symbol survived where the reality perished. The myth endured where the truth faded. She rides forever across human imagination. This warrior woman, this Amazon, this impossible female who challenges, threatens, fascinates. She never ages, never changes, never dies. She exists in eternal moment, bow drawn, horse galloping, hair streaming, forever young and fierce and free. She is more real now, in some ways, than the flesh and blood women who inspired her. Because flesh fails, bones crumble, even bronze corrodes eventually. But stories told and retold and told again, stories painted and carved and written and sung, stories that adapt to each era while remaining essentially unchanged. Stories live as long as human culture lives. The warrior women became stories, and stories became eternal. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is more than anyone could hope for. To be transformed into myth, to be remembered forever, even if the memory is wrong. To inspire and terrify and fascinate people who live thousands of years after your bones have turned to dust. Perhaps to become story is to become immortal in the only way that matters. The steppe grows quiet in your mind. The horses fade into distance. The sounds of battle, of arrows flying, of warriors crying out in triumph or pain. All of it softens, dissolves, becomes whisper, becomes silence, becomes the gentle quiet that settles over ancient things, over mysteries. Time has softened, over questions that have no final answers. And in that settling silence, in that gentle quiet, the stories remain, waiting, ready to be told again, forever. Kurgans on the horizon. The landscape looks empty at first. Endless grass rolling under endless sky. The Eurasian steppe in summer, stretching away toward horizons that seem impossibly distant. You could stand here and see nothing but grass and clouds and the occasional bird circling overhead. You could believe nothing had ever happened here, that this land was eternally empty, eternally waiting, untouched by human presence. But look more carefully. Notice how the land rises in certain places, gentle swells that seem too regular to be entirely natural. hills that appear too rounded, too symmetrical, too deliberately placed. These are not natural features. These are kurgans, burial mounds, ancient graves built by steppe peoples thousands of years ago. They rise from the grass like breaths made solid, like Earth's memory of the peoples who once lived here, rode here, fought here, died here. For centuries, these mounds were simply features of the landscape. Local farmers ploughed around them, shepherds used them as landmarks, children played on their grassy slopes, unaware they were dancing on graves. The kurgans held their secrets, patient as only Earth can be patient, waiting for someone to ask the right questions, to bring the right tools, to care enough to excavate. The first systematic archaeological expeditions came in the 19th century. Russian and European scholars pushing into Central Asia, mapping the empire, documenting peoples and places. They noticed the kurgans, understood they were artificial, began to dig. What they found astonished them. Gold, incredible quantities of gold, worked into intricate animal designs, weapons of bronze and iron, horse skeletons sacrificed to accompany the dead, and human remains, warriors buried with everything they would need for an afterlife that looked much like the life they had lived. But those early archaeologists made assumptions. When they found weapons in graves, they assumed the occupant was male. Warriors were men. Everyone knew this. So the skeletons, surrounded by swords and arrows and spears, must be male skeletons, regardless of what the bones themselves suggested. When the pelvis looked female, when the skull structure indicated a woman, the archaeologists decided they had made an error somewhere. Better to question the skeletal evidence than to question the assumption that warriors were always men. This error persisted for generations. Museums filled with artifacts from kurgan burials, labels identifying occupants as male warriors based on grave goods rather than skeletal analysis. The truth lay there, visible to anyone who looked carefully. But no one looked carefully because no one expected to find what was actually there. Expectation shaped perception. Assumption shaped conclusion. The warrior women lay in museum collections, misidentified, their stories untold. The change came slowly through the mid and late 20th century. New techniques in bioarchaeology allowed more accurate sex determination from skeletal remains. DNA analysis, when preservation permitted, could definitively identify biological sex. Anthropologists began questioning old assumptions, began re-examining burials that had been automatically labelled male, began finding that some of those warriors were women. The revelation spread gradually through academic communities in the 1970s and 1980s. Papers were published, conferences were held, skeptics demanded more evidence, insisted the findings must be errors, could not accept that their understanding of ancient gender roles was fundamentally wrong. But the evidence accumulated. More kurgans were excavated with proper, modern technique. More female warrior burials were documented. The pattern became undeniable. By the 1990s and 2000s, the academic consensus had shifted. Yes, some Scythian and Sarmatian women were warriors. Yes, they were buried with weapons and armour. Yes, the Greeks had encountered these women and built myths around them. The Amazons, it turned out, had a basis in reality after all, not cities of women, not the elaborate society Greek imagination created, but real warrior women, real enough to inspire the legends, real enough to challenge every assumption about gender and warfare in ancient societies. The kurgans still rise from the steppe, grass-covered and patient. But now, when archaeologists approach them, they come with different questions, different expectations, different willingness to see what is actually there, rather than what they expect to find. Each new excavation might reveal another warrior woman, another piece of evidence that human societies can organize gender in radically different ways, another reminder that the impossible might simply be the unfamiliar, waiting to be understood. The mounds hold more secrets still, Most kurgans remain unexcavated, waiting for future archaeologists with even better techniques, even more sophisticated questions. The steppe keeps its mysteries close, releasing them slowly, one burial at a time, one warrior woman at a time, one challenge to conventional wisdom at a time. The awakening of the past continues, gentle but relentless, like dawn spreading across the grasslands, illuminating what was always there, but hidden by the darkness of assumption and the shadows of expectation. Reading the bones. The skeleton lies in the laboratory, each bone carefully labelled, photographed, measured. This is not how she lived, spread across stainless steel tables under fluorescent lights, subject to scientific scrutiny. She lived on horseback, under open sky, moving with the seasons across grass that whispered beneath thousands of hooves. But death has brought her here, to this quiet room where researchers can ask questions her living voice never answered. She was approximately 35 years old when she died, sometime in the 4th century BC. The fusion of her cranial sutures, the wear on her teeth, the development of her bones, all point to this age range. Not old by modern standards, but respectable for a Scythian. A life that survived the constant dangers of nomadic existence, of warfare, of childbirth, of infections and injuries that killed so many before they reached adulthood. Her pelvis tells the first important story. The sciatic notch is wide, the subpubic angle broad, the overall shape definitively female. This is not ambiguous. This is not borderline. The bones declare with certainty that this skeleton belonged to a woman. Early archaeologists might have questioned this determination because of what else the grave contained. Modern researchers accept it because the evidence is clear. Her skull shows mongoloid features, the broad face and prominent cheekbones, typical of Central Asian populations. Her teeth are worn but mostly intact, showing the kind of damage consistent with a diet heavy in meat and with using teeth as tools, gripping leather or rope. One molar is missing, lost years before her death, the socket fully healed. She lived with this loss, adapted, continued eating and living and functioning despite it. But the most revealing evidence appears on her long bones, on the arms and legs that carried her through 35 years of steppe life. Her left humerus, the upper arm bone, shows enlarged muscle attachments on the lateral side, hypertrophy consistent with repetitive pulling motions. Her right humerus shows different patterns, development on the medial side, alterations to the elbow joint. Together, these changes create a distinctive signature. This woman drew a bow, repeatedly, powerfully, for years. Her left arm held the bow steady. Her right arm pulled the string. Her skeleton records this activity as clearly as if she had written it down. Her femurs, the thigh bones, show another pattern. The shafts are slightly bowed, curved in ways that suggest spending significant time on horseback. Her pelvis, despite being female in structure, shows some of the adaptations that riding creates, subtle changes in the hip sockets, in the orientation of the acetabulum. These modifications occur in riders who spend hours daily in the saddle, who grow up on horses, who use horses as primary transportation. This woman rode regularly, extensively, probably from childhood. Her ribs tell darker stories. 2 show healed fractures on the right side, breaks that occurred perhaps 10 or 15 years before her death. The healing is good, the bones fuse cleanly, but the fractures are there, permanent records of trauma. How did she break her ribs? A fall from a horse? A blow in combat? An accident during daily work? The bones cannot specify, but they confirm she experienced significant force to her chest, survived it, healed, continued living. Her left radius, the lower arm bone, shows another healed fracture. This one is more distinctive, a parry fracture, the kind of defensive wound that occurs when someone raises an arm to block a descending blow. The attacker's weapon, probably a club or the flat of a sword, struck her forearm hard enough to break the bone. She blocked the blow, saved her head perhaps, but paid the price in broken bone. Again, the healing is good. She survived, recovered, maintained use of her arm. The isotope analysis adds another layer of understanding. Strontium levels in her teeth, which formed in childhood, differ from levels in her bones, which represent her adult years. She moved during her life, travelled from one region to another, lived in different places with different geology. This fits the nomadic pattern, the seasonal migrations, the movement across vast territories that define steppe existence. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes reveal her diet. High protein, heavy on meat and dairy, minimal plant material. This matches what historians recorded about Scythian eating habits, confirms that she lived the lifestyle described in ancient texts. She ate what nomadic pastoralists ate, drank kumis made from mare's milk, consumed mutton and horse meat and cheese. DNA analysis, extracted from the petrous bone of her skull, where preservation is best, confirms her biological sex beyond any doubt. She has 2 X chromosomes. She is genetically female, but the DNA reveals more. Her maternal lineage traces back to Central Asian populations, to peoples who lived on the steppe for generations. She is not an outsider, not someone who adopted steppe life from elsewhere. She was born to this world, raised in this culture, belonged to these people. When researchers combine all this evidence, a picture emerges. This was a woman who learned archery in childhood, who practiced until the skill reshaped her very bones. She rode horses regularly, probably daily, from young age. She experienced violence, broke bones in combat or accidents, survived and healed. She ate the diet of a nomad, moved with her people across seasonal ranges. She lived 35 years, long enough to become skilled, experienced, valuable to her community. And when she died, her people buried her with honor. The grave goods included a bow, arrows with iron points, a sword, a knife, horse equipment. They included a bronze mirror, beads, everyday objects. They included everything she needed to continue her existence in the afterlife. They buried her as what she was, a warrior woman, a member of the community who had earned respect through her abilities and her service. Her bones do not lie. They cannot lie. They are evidence immune to cultural bias, to gender assumptions, to expectations about who can be what. They simply record what happened, what this body did, how this person lived. And what they record is a life that Greek civilization insisted was impossible. A woman who was a warrior, a female who fought, a human being who combined identities that patriarchal societies claimed could not be combined. Laboratories across Europe and Asia and America contain similar skeletons now, dozens of them, each telling similar stories. The evidence accumulates, builds, becomes overwhelming. The warrior women were real. The Amazons, in their historical form, existed. The myths were not entirely myth. The impossible was not entirely impossible. The bones tell truth that literary sources distorted, that cultural assumptions denied, that centuries of scholarship dismissed, and the bones keep speaking. Each new analysis, each improved technique, each better question reveals more details, more stories, more individual lives. The dead, through their bones, are more articulate than they ever could be through written records. They speak in the language of calcium and collagen, of isotopes and DNA, of fracture patterns and muscle attachments. They speak truth to power, challenge assumptions, insist on being heard. The woman on the laboratory table has no name that survives. She left no written words, no verbal testimony, no voice that echoes across millennia, but she speaks nonetheless, through the evidence her bones provide, through the story her skeleton tells. And what she says is simple, profound, revolutionary. I existed. I was a warrior. I was real. Remember me. You brush away the earth. The sun beats down on your shoulders as you kneel in the excavation pit. It is summer on the steppe, hot and dry, the kind of heat that makes air shimmer and turns distant features into wavering mirages. Your back aches from hours of careful work, bent over, moving slowly, documenting everything. This is archaeology, unglamorous and painstaking, requiring patience and precision and acceptance that most days yield small finds or nothing at all. But today is different. Today, 6 weeks into the excavation season, your team has found something. The kurgan you are excavating is not large by steppe standards, perhaps 4 meters high, 20 meters in diameter. Ground-penetrating radar suggested a burial chamber near the center, approximately 2 meters below current surface level. Your team spent 3 weeks carefully removing overburden, documenting soil layers, mapping the mound's construction. Then last week, you reached the burial chamber, a rectangular pit lined with wooden logs, long since rotted into dark stains in the earth. And there she is. The skeleton lies on its left side, knees slightly flexed, hands near the face. The position suggests careful placement, respect. Someone who was loved or at least valued by those who buried her. The bones are in remarkable condition, protected by the kurgan's bulk, preserved by the steppe's dry climate. Your brush touches bone for the first time. The contact sends a shiver through you that has nothing to do with temperature. You are touching someone who lived and died 2,400 years ago. Your 21st century hands connect across millennia to this ancient person, this individual whose story was lost until this moment. You work slowly, using soft brushes and dental tools, removing dirt grain by grain. The skull emerges first, appearing from the earth like something rising from water. You can see the sutures, the teeth, the orbital sockets where eyes once looked out at a world so different from yours that you can barely imagine it. This person saw grass and horses and felt tense. This person knew no cities, no writing, no technology beyond bronze and iron and leather and wood. This person lived a life you can only reconstruct through fragments. Moving down the skeleton, you expose the torso, the arms, the bones show, marks you recognize from training, from studying similar burials. The left humerus is enlarged on one side, the right shows different development. Archery. This person was an archer. Your excitement builds. The pelvis appears next, and your heart begins to race. Wide sciatic notch, broad subpubic angle, female. This skeleton is definitely female, and if she was an archer, if the grave goods you are beginning to expose confirm what you suspect, then you have found what your team hoped to find, but hardly dared to expect. A warrior woman, your brush touches metal, bronze, green with corrosion but unmistakable. You work around it carefully, exposing more. It is an arrowhead, triangular, socketed, designed to fit onto a wooden shaft long since decayed. Near it, another arrowhead, and another. You are finding her quiver, or what remains of it, the arrows that in life she carried, that in death her people gave her for the journey ahead. You sit back for a moment, overwhelmed. This is why you became an archaeologist, for moments like this, for direct connection to the past, for the privilege of being first person in over 2 millennia to see what you are seeing. You are looking at evidence that will be photographed, analysed, published, debated. You are looking at a life, an individual, a human being who challenges everything. Conventional wisdom once claimed about ancient gender roles. Your colleague appears at the edge of the pit, camera ready to document the find. You gesture her down. Together, you work through the afternoon, exposing more of the burial. A bronze mirror appears near the skull. Beads scatter around the neck area, perhaps a necklace. A knife lies near the right hand, and beneath the skeleton, barely visible, the stained earth that marks where leather once protected the body. Armour, perhaps, or simply good clothing chosen for burial. As the sun moves toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the excavation, you sit at the pit's edge, looking at what you have uncovered. Tomorrow, you will measure everything, photograph from every angle, collect samples for DNA and isotope analysis. Tomorrow, the scientific process will continue, methodical and thorough. But tonight, in this moment, you simply look and wonder. Who was she? What was her name? Did she have children? A family? People who mourned when she died? Was she famous in her time? A warrior whose deeds were sung? Or was she simply competent, good at what she did, valued but not legendary? Did she die in battle, feel the shock of an arrow or blade finding her flesh? Or did she die peacefully, in old age for her era, surrounded by grandchildren? You will never know the answers to most of these questions. The bones can tell you much, but not everything. DNA can reveal ancestry, but not personality. Isotopes can show diet, but not thoughts. The grave goods indicate status and role, but not dreams, fears, loves, regrets. So much is lost, unrecoverable, vanished with her final breath. But this much you know, she was real. She lived, she mattered enough that people built this mound over her, gave her their best possessions to take into death, remembered her. And now, after all these centuries, after being forgotten, erased, dismissed as impossible, she has been found again. You found her, you brought her back into human knowledge, into historical record, into the story we tell about who we were and who we might be. Your hands, dusty from the day's work, rest on your knees. These same hands will clean artifacts, will write reports, will share this discovery with the world. But in this quiet moment, they simply rest, tired and grateful. You are an archaeologist. You give voice to the silent dead. And today, you helped one more ancient voice speak, one more forgotten life return to memory, one more impossible woman become undeniably real. Warriors across time, the step where you found the warrior woman is not unique. The world has always contained women who fought, who took up weapons, who challenged the assumption that warfare is exclusively male domain. The Scythian and Sarmatian warrior women were not alone, not the only examples, not even the most recent. They were simply the ones who inspired the Amazon legends, whose proximity to Greek civilization allowed their reality to seep into Mediterranean consciousness. Look across time and space, and you find them everywhere. In ancient Vietnam, the Trung sisters led rebellions against Chinese rule in 40 AD, commanding armies, winning battles, becoming national heroes whose memory Vietnam cherishes to this day. In medieval Japan, Onimusha, female warriors, trained in martial arts and fought alongside men during conflicts, particularly in times of clan warfare, when every sword mattered. Tomoe Gozen, fighting in the late 1200s AD, was celebrated in epic poetry for her battlefield prowess, for cutting through enemy ranks, for choosing death in battle over surrender or capture. In West Africa, the Dahomey Amazons, the Agoji, served their kings from the 1600s through the late 1800s AD. They were not myths, not exaggerations. They were real military units, thousands strong at their peak, training in combat from youth, fighting in wars, inspiring fear and respect in enemies. European colonizers encountered them, were shocked by them, tried to dismiss them as curiosities. But the Agoji were professional soldiers, effective warriors who proved themselves in battle after battle. Among Native American peoples, warrior women appeared in various forms across different cultures. Lozan of the Apache fought alongside Geronimo in the late 19th century, known for her tactical skills and spiritual powers. Running Eagle of the Blackfoot led war parties, earned the right to sit in council with men, lived as a warrior until her death in battle. Many tribes had more flexible gender roles than European societies, allowed individuals to adopt roles based on ability and inclination, rather than biological sex alone. The Middle East and Mediterranean world, despite cultural emphasis on female domesticity, produced warrior women in specific contexts. Jewish history remembers Deborah, the prophet and judge who led Israel in battle according to the Book of Judges. Islamic history records women who fought alongside Muhammad, who defended Medina, who took up weapons when necessity demanded. These women are exceptions in their cultures, but exceptions that prove the possibility exists even in societies that normally forbid it. Medieval Europe had Joan of Arc, the peasant girl who led French armies to victory, who was burned as a heretic, partly because her cross-dressing and military role violated gender norms so completely. She is remembered as a saint now, but in her lifetime, she was an impossibility. A woman doing what women could not do, challenging every rule about proper feminine behavior. Her existence, like the Scythian warrior women, proved that culture determines what is possible more than biology does. These women, scattered across continents and centuries, share common features. They emerge during times of crisis, when normal social rules relax under pressure of survival. They prove themselves through ability, earn respect through results, force their societies to acknowledge that gender roles are not absolute. They are often exceptional. Minorities within their cultures, women who pushed against boundaries rather than women accepted as routine. But they exist. They have always existed. The pattern suggests something important. Warrior women are not impossible. They are not violations of natural law. They are simply violations of cultural convention, challenges to the social orders that most societies prefer to maintain. When necessity demands, when cultures allow even briefly, when individual women have ability and opportunity, female fighters emerge. They always have. They probably always will. The Amazon myth, then, is not entirely myth. It is memory, distorted and exaggerated, of something real. The Greeks encountered warrior women on the steppe and transformed them into legend. But the kernel of truth remained, preserved in the amber of mythology, waiting for archaeologists with proper tools and open minds to rediscover it. And perhaps that is the real lesson. The impossible is often simply the unfamiliar. The unnatural is often simply the culturally disapproved. What we insist cannot happen has usually happened somewhere, sometime, to someone who did not know it was impossible, and therefore did it anyway. The warrior women teach us this. They challenge us to question our assumptions, to examine our certainties, to remain open to possibilities that conventional wisdom rejects. They teach us, too, that being forgotten is not the same as never existing. The Scythian warrior women were forgotten for 2,000 years, dismissed as myth, erased from historical record. But they existed nonetheless. Their bones remained in the earth, waiting, patient, ready to speak when someone finally thought to ask the right questions. How many other forgotten peoples, other dismissed possibilities, other rejected realities wait in the earth, in archives, in the gaps of historical knowledge, ready to challenge what we think we know about human nature and human possibility? The warrior women ride through history, visible to those who look for them, invisible to those who cannot imagine them. They remind us that the world is larger than our assumptions, that human diversity exceeds our categories, that the impossible might be happening right now, somewhere, in ways we lack the wisdom or the courage to see. The myth lives. Step into a comic book shop, a bookstore, a movie theatre in the 21st century, and you will find her, the Amazon, still fierce, still armed, still challenging patriarchal assumptions, 2,000 years after the last Sarmatian warrior woman died on the steppe. She has survived the fall of Rome, the rise of Christianity, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution. She has adapted to each era, changed her costume and weapons and backstory, but remained essentially herself. The warrior woman, the impossible female who refuses to stay defeated, buried, forgotten. Wonder Woman, created in 1941 AD by William Moulton Marston, explicitly draws on Amazon mythology. She comes from Themyscira, that legendary city the Greeks invented. She is princess of the Amazons, daughter of a queen, trained from birth as a warrior, but she fights for truth and justice, uses her strength to protect the weak, embodies both feminine compassion and martial prowess. She is the Amazon redeemed, stripped of threat, made safe for American audiences by giving her patriotic values and moral clarity. The character resonates because she addresses persistent questions about female power, about what women could be if freed from patriarchal constraints, about strength and gentleness combined. She is fantasy, yes, but fantasy that speaks to reality, to desires and possibilities that conventional gender roles suppress. Little girls playing Wonder Woman, are playing Amazon, are imagining themselves as warriors, as strong and capable and free. The myth serves them as it once served Greeks, though with inverted meaning. For Greeks, the Amazon was warning. For modern women, she is inspiration. Fantasy literature proliferates with warrior women now, Amazon-inspired characters filling pages and screens. Some are well-developed, complex figures who grapple with combining traditional femininity with martial roles. Others are simply male warriors with female bodies, wish-fulfillment fantasies created by men who find female strength erotic when safely fictional. But all testify to the Amazon's enduring power, her ability to capture imagination, her refusal to be dismissed as mere historical curiosity. Feminist scholars have reclaimed the Amazon as symbol of female resistance to patriarchal oppression. The Amazon becomes the woman who says no, who refuses submission, who takes up weapons literal or metaphorical to defend her autonomy. She represents possibilities that patriarchy must suppress, potentials that women might realize if given opportunity and freedom. She is not role model in any literal sense. Few feminists actually advocate for all-female warrior societies. But she is inspiration. Reminder that gender roles are constructed rather than natural, that women's strength has always existed, even when denied and suppressed. The archaeological discoveries have added new dimension to modern Amazon fascination. The revelation that warrior women actually existed, that the myths had historical basis, has energized both scholarly study and popular interest. Museums mount exhibitions of Scythian warrior women burials, displaying the bows and arrows and bronze mirrors that accompanied these women into death. Documentaries explore the discoveries, bringing ancient lives to television audiences worldwide. The warrior women, properly identified at last, become ambassadors from the past, teaching modern viewers that human societies can organize gender in radically different ways. For some women, particularly in military and martial arts contexts, the historical Amazons provide validation. Female soldiers, female fighters, women who have chosen martial paths despite cultural discouragement can point to the steppe warrior women and say, "See, we have always existed. We are not anomalies, not violations of nature, not modern aberrations. We are continuation of ancient tradition. Women who fight because we can, because we choose to, because ability has no gender." The conversation continues, evolving with each generation. Young women today encounter the Amazon myth in countless forms, from comic books to video games to academic texts. They absorb it differently than their grandmothers did, filter it through contemporary concerns about gender equality, about female representation in media, about expanding what it means to be woman in the 21st century. And the myth adapts, as it has always adapted, to serve current needs. The Amazon is no longer purely threat or warning. She is also possibility, inspiration, challenge to rigid gender categories. She asks uncomfortable questions that each era must answer for itself. Why are women constrained? What might they become if freed? What does society fear from female strength? What does it desire from female power? The archaeological discoveries ensure the questions remain grounded in reality, rather than floating free as pure fantasy. The Scythian warrior women existed. This is not speculation, not wish fulfillment, not political agenda disguised as scholarship. The bones testify, The DNA confirms. The evidence is overwhelming. Women were warriors, at least sometimes, in at least some cultures, in the real historical past. This fact, documented and undeniable, changes the conversation. It forces acknowledgement that what we call natural or inevitable might be neither. It demonstrates that human possibility exceeds cultural convention. It proves that the Amazon, in essence, if not in detail, was real. And so the myth lives, not as falsehood, not as fantasy, entirely separate from truth, but as elaboration on reality, as exaggeration of actual history, as symbol built on foundation of fact. The warrior women who inspired it are long dead, their cultures transformed or vanished, their languages silent, their stories mostly lost. But the myth they inspired thrives, adapts, continues to challenge and inspire and trouble people who encounter it. She rides forever, this Amazon, through human imagination and human history, through archaeological sites and museum displays, through comic books and scholarly journals, through dreams of girls who want to be strong and fears of men who want women weak. She is unkillable because she is idea. She is eternal because she speaks to something permanent in human nature. The desire for freedom, the question of what we might become, the challenge to every boundary that claims to be natural but is merely enforced. The myth lives. And so, in ways that matter, do the warrior women who inspired it, remembered at last, properly understood at last, real at last. After 2,000 years of being dismissed as impossible, they have returned from the realm of story, dragging truth back with them, insisting on being seen and heard and acknowledged. The Amazons were real, and that changes everything. Riding forever. Listen, and you can almost hear them, even now, even after all these centuries. The sound of hooves on grass, thousands of horses moving across the steppe under skies, so vast they seem to curve down to touch the earth, at horizons impossibly distant. The sound of hooves, and beneath it, the breathing of the riders, women and men together, moving with the seasons, following herds, living the ancient patterns of nomadic existence. The sound grows softer now, fading into distance, into time, into the quiet spaces between memory and dream. The warriors are riding away, have been riding away for generations, for centuries, disappearing into the past that claims everything eventually, that makes even stone crumble and bronze corrode and memory fade. But listen more carefully, and the sound does not quite disappear. It lingers somehow, echo without end, reverberation that continues long after the source has vanished. The warriors are still riding, somewhere, in some realm where stories live, and myths endure, and impossibilities remain forever possible. Imagine them there, in that eternal steppe that exists only in imagination and in dreams. The grass is always green, the sky always perfect blue with white clouds drifting like thoughts across the infinite dome of heaven. The horses never tire, the riders never age, the arrows in their quivers never deplete. They ride forever in eternal summer, in the golden afternoon that never fades to evening, in the moment before sunset when light turns soft and the world seems almost holy in its beauty. She is there, the priestess warrior from her kurgan near the Volga, young again, whole again, riding with bow in hand and prayers on her lips. She is there, the woman with the healed fractures, the defensive wounds, the bones that spoke of battles survived and violence overcome. She is there, Penthesilea, no longer dying in the dust of Troy, but riding free across celestial grasslands. No Greek hero to strike her down, no tragedy to mar her eternal afternoon. They are all there. Every warrior woman who ever drew a bow, who ever rode into battle, who ever chose or was chosen for martial life. The ones whose bones we have found, and the ones still buried beneath steppe grass, waiting for archaeologists who may never come. The ones who died young in glory, and the ones who lived long enough to grow old. to teach granddaughters, to watch the world change around them. All of them, riding together, a warband without end, sisters across the centuries. The sound of hooves becomes like music, becomes like breathing, becomes like the rhythm of waves on distant shores. Steady and soothing and eternal, the sound asks nothing of you now, except to listen, to float alongside it, to let it carry you wherever dreams carry the nearly sleeping, wherever consciousness dissolves into that gentle country between waking and true rest. They ride through starfields now, these eternal Amazons, their horses' hooves finding purchase on nothing, on everything, on the fabric of space and time itself. Their arrows fly not toward enemies but toward wonders, toward questions, toward mysteries that recede forever, always interesting, but never threatening. They ride in joy, in freedom, in that perfect liberty that death grants to those who lived with courage, who left their mark, who mattered. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all anyone can hope for, to ride forever in the dreams of those who come after, to remain as symbol, as inspiration, as reminder that human possibility exceeds human convention, that the impossible is often merely the unfamiliar, that strength and courage and freedom have no gender, no boundary, no limitation, except the one's imagination imposes. The sound grows softer still, fading now like all things fade, becoming whisper, becoming silence, becoming the gentle quiet that settles over all stories when they reach their ending. The warriors ride on, but you can barely hear them now, can barely see them in the distance where reality and dream blur into one another, where history and myth exchange places, where everything that was and might have been and could be still dwells together in eternal present. Sleep comes like dusk across the steppe, gentle and inevitable, bringing stars that shine on grass, that whispers in wind, that carries the scent of horses and leather and the smoke of distant fires. Sleep comes on hooves that make no sound, on wings that cast no shadow, on the breath of warriors who ride forever through the quiet spaces of human memory and human hope. They are riding still. They will always be riding, and you, drifting now toward dreams, can ride with them if you wish, can join that eternal warband, can feel the horse beneath you and the bow in your hand and the wind in your hair as you gallop across forever, free and fierce and impossible, a warrior of the steppe, an Amazon of the eternal grasslands, riding, riding, always riding into that golden light that never fades, that waits for you beyond the edge of waking, in the country where the ancient stories live and breathe and welcome you home. Rest now. The warriors will keep watch. The steppe is patient. The stars are kind. And sleep, when it comes, carries you on gentle hooves across the borderland between what was and what might be, between memory and dream, between the earth where warrior women once rode and the sky where they ride forever, waiting to greet you in the peaceful dark, in the quiet spaces, in the gentle night. I'm thankful you've joined me in visiting these distant memories. Rest well beneath the starlit skies of ancient nights.